Next order of business is approval of minutes. Are there any changes to the minutes? Since there are no changes, the minutes are approved as written. Public participation. The members of the Tolland Board of Education welcome members of the public to share their thoughts and ideas at this time. When appropriate to do so, members of the board and the administration may respond to comments during points of information. However, in consideration of those in attendance and in an effort to proceed in a timely manner, follow-up discussion may need to take place outside of meeting setting. So at this time, is there anyone that would like to speak online or in the audience?
Yes, I'd like to speak.
Just state your name and address for the record.
Certainly. My name is Patricia Phillips. I'm a resident of 202 Anthony Road. It's pretty unfortunate that I'm here tonight to have to talk to you about this. My daughter is a student at Tolland Middle School, and it has come to my attention that she and some of her friends at school have been experiencing bullying and sexual harassment. I talked to them and I asked them, you know, have you gone to any teachers, guidance counselors, anything like that? And they verbalized that they have not, because they feel like the staff and teachers are hearing what is going on and ignoring the behavior of the other peers who are doing this. There have also been racial slurs, negative references to LGBTQ. And it's my understanding that in 2012, Tolland Public Schools started the positive behavioral interventional support with the SOAR, core values of the Tolland Public School System. What I've heard from my daughter doesn't reflect those behaviors that are expected: safety, ownership, active learning, and respect. How can somebody have a safe place to learn when those fundamentals aren't enforced? And even though it's not physical abuse, it's emotional abuse. And she's expressed anxiety. There have also been friends of hers that aren't comfortable, approaching any teachers or counselors at the school. I'm just concerned because she still has a few years to go. Our school system and our community, it's a little disappointing to me. And I know that teachers can't babysit kids in school, and a lot of these things start at home. But I feel that in the age that we're in now, with everything going on, in media, on social media, we really need to look at what's going on in the school system. There's emails that are sent out about disciplinary actions for kids who partake in any of the TikTok challenges or whatever they are. Kids are punished for talking, when they're supposed to be quiet, but there's other real issues that are going on in the school. And I feel strongly that I would like them addressed. And I also want to know that if for instance, the Title IX coordinator for the school system, if they're not actively working, is there somebody else who knows how to do that job that can cover for them? So, those are my concerns.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone from the public? From online? Liz, go ahead.
Hi, Liz Costa, 54 Josiah Lane. Hopefully everybody's doing well. I just want to enunciate that I am very much a proponent for keeping masking in our schools. We still, I don't know how many, I think I counted over 100 cases of children being quarantined over the last 10 or 12 days. And I'm sure it's keeping Dr. Willett and his nurses and his admins very busy. However, most importantly, our kids are getting the same, all having the same equal chances to mastery-based learning if they're at home with just an opportunity to view the classroom one way. So I'm really advocating for keeping a mask. I know it's not necessarily up to the Board of Ed, but the DPH as well. So I'm just echoing our family sentiment to keep masking appropriate in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Shay Belair.
I think, hold on one second. I just wanted to turn my camera on. Thank you. Shay Belair, 185 Cosley Road. So I'm a parent of 2 children in town, a middle school student and a high school student. I also want to share to the board that I'm also a teacher at the middle school. So tonight I'm just addressing the Board of Ed and Dr. Willett as a parent of an 8th grade student with regards to the DC trip. So I have read and I have heard Mr. Spangle speak to the fact that students that are not vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine are ineligible to attend this trip. I disagree with this decision. Excluding a population of students for a medical decision is wrong. I believe every effort should be made to provide equitable access to all educational experiences. Anything short of that is unacceptable. Extra staff could chaperone the trip should students not be allowed entry to a venue due to their vaccination status. Whether you're vaccinated or not, somebody could get sick on the trip, and so that would have to also be addressed. So I do believe that excluding a population of students is wrong. As we navigate another school year heavily impacted by COVID, all educational decisions should include the entire population with equitable access. And by excluding a population, that is not providing equitable access to all educational experiences. I do appreciate you guys hearing me tonight. I am a little bit nervous, so bear with me. And I do also want to acknowledge, I know a lot of thought went into these decisions, but as we continue to make these decisions, we cannot exclude a population of students based on their vaccination status for a vaccine that is not fully FDA approved for students and children under the age of 15 at this time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Shay. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to speak? Going once, going twice. Okay, from here, we'll go on to correspondence. Tony, do you have a correspondence report?
I do.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. All right. We received a letter asking for water companies to stop fluoridating our water. A letter discussing the strategy for learning for students being quarantined. Author states that the technology to do better exists within our school. A letter concerned with the adult themes being taught in the 7th grade language arts class. Letter sharing a parent's perspective on the inadequacy of the learning process for quarantined students. Letter asking if CRT is or will be taught at Tolland Public Schools. Letter advocating against the current directive that the DC trip participants must be vaccinated. A letter asking the board not to make a vaccine mandate. Letter stating that teachers are advocating for the vaccine in classes. Letter asking if the students will host vaccine clinics, if the schools will host vaccine clinics or provide guidance once a vaccine is available for younger students. Letter asking for teachers of quarantined students to turn on their cameras to support the educational needs of these quarantined students. Letter discussing the real learning challenges of 2 students that have been quarantined. Letter concerned that quarantine students are not being supported educationally. A letter expressing disappointment that the DC trip will go forward and exclude unvaccinated children. Letter expressing frustration in COVID restrictions and testing for upcoming events such as the DC trip and the homecoming dance. And a letter expressing frustration and disappointment at the decision to exclude non-vaccinated students from the DC trip. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Next up is points of information. Does anyone on the board want to speak? Oh, Ashley's good at that. No one who was first, thank you. All right, Griffin.
I just wanted to thank you for speaking, and I did see Dr. Willett speak with you, so I appreciate that he's bringing this to all of our attention, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to kind of remedy this situation
Yeah.
and see what's going on.
I'm really here to advocate for my daughter's friends who have talked to me about what they're experiencing too. I mean, I can speak on my daughter's behalf and I can, you know, talk to Dr. Willett about her, but there are other kids out there who are experiencing this and it's not right.
Thank you. Do you want to address the DC now, Ms. Belair, or would you like to wait until?
Oh, it's I'm just going around the room, so if you have any.
That was my other point.
Okay, make your point.
Okay, I'll just say that, Ms. Belair, I, do hear what you're saying, and I do agree with you, and I think we'll be discussing this in H4, so we can talk about it as a board a little bit later, but I want you to know that, I did hear what you said.
Thank you. Madhu.
Okay, so the first part I was gonna agree with what Griffin said. I'm very sorry that this happened to you, and thank you for coming here. And I understand that you're gonna be speaking, so thank you again for coming and advocating.
Sure.
Yeah, I know we're gonna talk about this in the DC trip, another item. I don't like seeing kids excluded. I get the reasons why, I just don't like it, but we'll go more in H4.
Thank you.
Yep.
And I'll just say again, thank you. And I'm sure Dr. Willett will talk to you about one-off. And if there's any policy changes that can occur from this, they would go to Tony and the policy committee. So we're on it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then that was it for now. I think we can talk about it. Oh, who was first?
I just want to
I saw her
also
things right across my
express,
face.
my thank you for coming in. It's not easy to do. It's not easy to say, and I appreciate you bringing it forward because we need to know. We
Right.
need to address these things, and we're going to, and I have every confidence that Dr. Willett will do what needs to be done, but sometimes you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah,
And
and things don't
until somebody
change
speaks up,
without-
it's very
Yeah.
important that people, and it's hard to do. And I want to just express my appreciation that you've done that.
Thank you.
Tony?
And I want to chime in as well. I've got 3 daughters that have or are going through Tolland Public Schools, and none of them are the extroverted kind that would step up and necessarily say something, And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's advocating for the ones that aren't necessarily comfortable enough. So I want to thank you for bringing it here where we can be certain, that Dr. Willett and his staff will absolutely deal with it. We can make sure that attention is there.
Yeah.
So thank
And
you.
I know, I have talked to Mr. Spangle and he's been wonderful, but I wanted to come here too.
I appreciate that.
And I think Dana?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, you can hear me? Okay, hang on. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, Dana, we can hear you.
Thank you, Tony, for the thumbs up. I saw that. So first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for their participation. And obviously, I just want to reiterate what everybody else said. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I definitely appreciate you coming in tonight and speaking on behalf of your student as well as their peers. It is a difficult topic to talk about. And like I said, I definitely feel confident Dr. Willett and the staff at the school will do what he's very open to scheduling time and having that. So I appreciate it. It's very disheartening to hear your story. And anyways, it was tough to listen to what you had to say. And so I appreciate that you came and brought it up to everybody's attention. And I'm sure that I'll give it, the staff will do its due diligence to make sure that this doesn't happen to any other students. And and get involved. So thank you for sharing.
I did see your hand up.
Yes.
Just in terms of the agenda, we can't have the public speak again until the second public participation.
Oh.
But we do allow, there's public participation with more two-way conversations in our communications committee. So keep your eye out for those agendas.
And just to add, no sexual harassment or bullying is ever okay. So, I'm desiring to meet with you whenever you can. You hear more about struggles and pain you've had, and any groups of students too. We do have a Title IX person, and we do have somebody who does come in when that person, if that person. And to Washington, we do have that agenda item, so I'll save any comments for that.
Sounds good. Any additional points?
I'm sorry, but this is air traffic control.
The agenda.
All right, I believe the student reps, Natalie and Emily, are not here tonight. So we'll move on to the superintendent's report. H1 is the monthly financial report.
Okay. Let me just try to get this. Just so people at home can see the same thing, so it's just a little funky. Okay, so. So as you know, each month we do at the beginning, first meeting of the month, we do the monthly financial report. So of course, this month is no different. And as we start the year, or in the early part of the year, we obviously have a significant balance at this time. It's 1.6 million, or $1,618,530, or 3.97% of the board's budget. The expenditures, are not, as you might imagine, fully expended at this time either. And people can view these through the agenda, but also so that you can see them online. Kind of try to post them up on the shared screen here. And I'll talk through just some of the well, there's really not a whole lot to talk through because the numbers haven't run down all that much right now. So, so I don't have a particular narrative kind of put together because we're just very early.
Okay.
So I could take questions and then get answers for anybody who wants them. But we have not expended that much. We're in essentially the third month. Generally, right now during a typical year, we might not have all staff hired, but we are still in the process of filling positions. I was looking to get the October number. I don't have that right now. But this simply does 3 months of expenses, items such as salaries, health insurance, FICA, Social Security, legal, audit, utilities, tuition, transportation, textbooks, professional services. They have not all been fully encumbered, and as you might imagine, are definitely not all spent. The 1.6 million that's there as a balance will be converted to encumbrances and expenditures over the next couple of months. So you should see that drop significantly as we move forward through the year. And I don't expect this year to have as much really in the salaries line, because we had a lot of positions last year that were not being filled, including we, as you might remember, for a good portion of it, did not fill the assistant principal job and things like that. So we will have a much more significant expense of the salary line than we did in the past. So you'll see that kind of diminish more quickly as well. So that is roughly it. If you have questions, I'll try to.
Okay. Any board members have questions? Tony?
Just for Ms. Griffin, is FFC look through this?
Yes, we will look at the more detailed schedule in our next meeting for the September 30th numbers.
Any concerns, red flags?
No, I think we talked about, Dr. Willett, did we confirm that the reason why the salaries line was over budget already was because we have like the grant positions in there and the
That
summer
we haven't been
school?
reimbursed
We
for
just
that.
haven't gotten any of those yet. So that was the only thing that had jumped out at us last month, but so we're just, I guess that'll take a little bit of time to even out that line item.
Yeah, the computer will tell you you're gonna spend this much, but we have grant money coming in, and that's why it's overspent.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Jacob?
This might be good to follow up with again in FFC, but I would just noticed that the TEA line, the Tuition Education Agency line, had a major change over the past month. I'm assuming again that probably just has to do with understanding our needs for that line better as we get farther up into the year, but I did notice it was at a negative balance, up from like a 9% balance in the previous report. And the other one I think was transportation that I had a question about, but again, I would assume that we probably transferred a bunch of funds for that to our bus services. Would that be correct?
Yeah, what
Yeah.
you're seeing probably in Tuition Education Agency is the encumbrance of the total amount, you know, and that would be what they would do at the beginning of the year
Yeah.
once they got themselves underway. So that's gonna send that into some level of either negativity or much lower balance status.
Yeah.
And then as money comes in, or as we balance that out, you know, as you might note, like this past year, we did end up with tuition. So sometimes it ends up positive at the end, even if we do see negative based on the encumbrances. Transportation, my eyes are worse than most people. Jump to that. Student transportation services. Again, the encumbrance is going to be probably what knocked that way down.
It is.
Because we just, you know, once we get started and they get through the wrapping up of the previous year, they start throwing in encumbrances.
Yeah.
And in Mr. McLaughlin's narrative, you do see him talking about the more will be encumbered as the next couple of months go on. And so you can expect that and you expect those balances to fluctuate.
I figured that was probably what was going on, but I thought I'd ask.
No, very great questions and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Willett. Oh, Rainey?
Just a quick question around transportation. So, you know, we've had some issues with the buses. We don't have as many buses and so forth. Is that just, this is a question, do we get charged less when we're only having half the buses out there? Or how do we still have to pay the full contract? Like, how does that work?
So when there is less bus utilization, we do go back to First Student and have a conversation with them about and how charges are adjusted accordingly. And we've done that in the past. We'll continue to do that. This anomaly was like a 3-day kind of thing, and we pulled in people and you know started staffing buses from other locations. So we'll probably see a little bit maybe, but not a ton for the 2 or 3 days because we were down by 12 and then the next day by 8 and then today not that many at
So
all.
we're basically back to full steam.
Yeah. Yes.
Checking.
Yes,
Okay.
we are. And today was a good day. It seems like today was, we were back to typical operational status.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, we'll move on to H2, the end of year report.
Just so people can follow along at home. To the best of, hopefully you can see that. So essentially, you may remember the phase documents from the previous year that kind of talked about how and in what way the budget would be winding down and what the projection was at a certain point. So the objective of this document is to do the best that I could with the time allowed or available to kind of give you a sense of what the big, you know, what the big under and overs were. So, you know, what generated, you know, the balance that we had at the end, and then how that balance was also mitigated or expended based on some of the end of year phase information and so on. So, you know, I don't know, I probably don't need to read the entire narrative here, but just I'll try to truncate it a little bit. You know, special education tuitions, so the district paid significantly less for students during the COVID pandemic. The pandemic, you know, really did impact services, and so funds were adjusted accordingly. Also, you know, we had open choice funds come in as well. So a higher excess cost reimbursement also helped us. So that line was up by, or we had 653,000 at the end in that line. Line 510, student transportation, kind of based, you know, on the conversation we had before, was under budget due to, you know, savings generated by the COVID pandemic. We had split runs. We weren't using as much of the services. And so fewer bus services related in, you know, savings or money that was not expended to the nature of 584,000. End of year under budget for salaries, and we talked about that already. It was basically gaps, and people would be leaving, and then when we would get somebody hired to replace it, there sometimes would be a gap of many months, and that was money not expended on salary. Also, positions couldn't be filled, so there were salaries that were not expended on pay that was not expended during that time. That was 318,000. These are the big three, really. Line 420, 430, repairs, custodial cleaning, etc. Some of the projects just did not occur. Some did, some didn't. Some were transferred, and you'll notice at the bottom to kind of a different focus. That's 115. Newly hired employees and those retired can impact balances, and that also relates to staffing. So in line 220, there's a balance of 91. 240, 250, 260 were collectively under, and those relate again back to salaries, back to the kinds of situations that happen with personnel. Heating and gas expenses were transferred. There was a savings based on lower fuel consumption. That was reflected here. So, you know, just taking and trying to choose some of the ones, some of the big ones, you get a sense of where some of the money, you know, was not expended, or how, you know, what are some of the bigger chunks of what came back to the district. Over budget, and some of these have to do with some of the you know, phase documents that we went through and as we got to the end of the year. Health, life, and disability over professional education services, tech services, and general supplies, and materials and supplies, etc. So these things totaled about 1.1 million, and there was about 1.8 million that we had, you know, roughly coming back to us. So the difference was roughly 796 in actual numbers, but this chart accounted for about 782 of that, which is about 98% of the variance of it was in the things you're seeing here. So this is more or less the in and the out, to try to give you a sense of you know, how that came down. Just see if I have. And so, and the FFC, some of this was covered in the FFC meeting, and I did end up posting those prior to the meeting, but probably not enough time to be digested. So that a lot of these were discussed in FFC and will probably be followed up in the next FFC meeting at some point here too.
Thank you, Dr. Willett. Anybody have any questions? You good, Dana? Are you raising your hand?
I kind of was like, when we're talking about this F1 response, I appreciate the effort that went into that, and it's helpful to have the narrative, but sometimes it's also helpful to have like a couple line items that sort of maybe come close to the number. So that, you know, when we're saying an overage, it's driven by this, this, and this, like if there's just like a rough, this was this, this was that, I mean, just, I hate to say the accounting part of me is like, well, what, I still don't feel like I really know what was spent on what a little bit. So that was just my, I mean, like the uniform is great. Okay, that was obvious, but like line 731, 112,000, it's still murky to me what happened there. So
Yeah,
that's just my feedback. I'm not saying we have to discuss.
So I would
it
say
in-
any follow-up in FFC, we
Right,
can do that.
exactly,
There
but
was
We're gonna follow
Q&A.
up in FFC if we could be a little bit more granular
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, it's just,
For me.
sure, and this was mainly to explain variance, you know, how much roughly, so understood, and then FFC can do more. May I could speak a little to, you know, some of the things in FFC, if you want me to go through that, but.
Not necessarily, I'm just saying, you know, the document is great, it's helpful from a narrative perspective, but just, you know, sometimes it's helpful to be like, you know, big chunks, like
Yeah.
this was the, yeah, and that's with this, and but, you know, that type of thing.
No, I totally do, and I appreciate that, and frankly, to be very frank, it's just time. It's, if I can publish an agenda on a Monday sometimes in a week like this, then I can give a lot more info, and sometimes I just,
Great. That was all. That was fine.
Thank you.
honestly.
Anybody else? No? Okay. Move on to H3, quarantine support. Did you post something?
Yeah, and originally it was just, this agenda item was put on for the purpose of the board just discussing the quarantine support, but here's just. Have access to this. And this is essentially, this is mirrored in what was sent or is what is linked on the superintendent's bulletin as well. So people that, you know, and it's also in the Tolland Public School program. Here, just let me get. So this is mirrored in the Tolland Public School Safe Return to In-Person Instruction and Continuity of Services Plan. That, again, that title is not chosen by me to try to cause misery in the world. That's the official document name that has to be in it because of the ESSERS or ESSER fund grant. So that's the title that we have to call the plan. But the plan itself has in it appendices, and in the appendices, one of the appendices is a description of the overall pandemic student and family quarantine supports and resources. So these pandemic resources include, and this was put out there Monday as well, that effective no later than, which means some have started already, one directional live audio stream from the classroom for students that are in a quarantine status. It also can be live video and audio stream, or just an audio stream, depending on the situation. Also, teachers may use pre-recorded videos. The content is linked through Google Meets, which people are usually familiar with at this point. And, you know, talking to the K teachers today, we may shift it up a little bit for K, given the population and what K can and can't do. The link to the content are only for students in quarantine status, and the audio video Google Meet sessions are streamed straight from the system and the teacher's computer and are posted on Google Classroom ahead of time. The AE or associate educator works in conjunction with the family and the teacher to try to make sure that there's a connection there, and that if there are questions or follow-up or help needed, that they'll circle back with the family. Under the section of supplemental staff support, the AEs are identified, so you can kind of get a sense of who the associate educators are for the district, which building they usually cover, what their contact number is, and what their email is. This information is also sent with every quarantine message, so any student put into a quarantine status, this information is sent to them, sent to the parent guardians directly, and includes all the contact information for the associate educators, and now includes also the information about the live streaming. Associate educators are tasked with facilitating communication between the teacher and the quarantine student and family, providing support to the student and schoolwork, to help with Google Classroom if they're having trouble, help identify any needs. If there are certain students who have certain more profound needs than others, they will try to identify them, bring them to the attention of other support staff and teachers. They'll provide support with assignments if kids are struggling or they're having trouble connecting to it. They also will provide sessions with kids when that support is needed. They provide social and emotional support as best they can in these circumstances. You'll notice also the section below is on counseling supports. So the phone numbers also to the counseling departments are also there for quarantine families, so that if their child is struggling, they would be able to make contact with a counselor, and the counselor can also do many forms of outreach, and they have on many occasions in this situation. The A's can also provide individual or small group sessions as needed, and they can also provide assistance to support students as they return from quarantine. We have a number of programs also starting that we're in initiation phase for kids that when they come back, they can also get additional assistance, and the A's also participate in that. The counseling support is the last part of this particular part of the appendices, and I didn't include more because the other appendices go into a lot of other things. But essentially, the counselors, as I said before, kind of on. So we had a pretty tough weekend or 2 weekends here. The Delta variant is much more contagious. And so we had a couple of encounters and are still getting information from the health district on large organizations that are experiencing COVID positives and knocking out kids in the organization. So those are various athletic organizations, travel teams, other teams, youth teams, scouting programs, dance programs. And in the last 2 weeks, we had a number of those programs get impacted and also impact the school system and, together. And so some of the stuff that is happening right now is, when we go into quarantine status in school, sometimes it's difficult, or people are kind of remembering the situation, and sometimes they may not, they may bring a child who's in a quarantine situation, a close contact, to an event or something. And that can, if that child goes over to be a positive, have an impact on that group in the school. So there's a number of community impacts right now. There's also impacts, obviously from some of the families, and there is always the possibility of impacts from school as well. They're not prevalent. It's not a high number from my estimation at this time. But I'm going to try to put out a message at some point soon to the community, just asking for continued vigilance. I think a lot of people are very tired, understandably. The pandemic is been lasting now for into the 20 months and more. It's a very difficult situation. And we just have to continue to work in partnership with the community. And then you're doing a great job with staying vigilant with the requirements of quarantine and following through with that. So, I think we are going to be in a better place as we get to the December holiday, school holiday. When vaccinations open up for the population, they are available to 12-year-olds and above. They are approved by the CDC. There's a lot of information that went back and forth today, and I did put that out there, emergency approval and so on. Responded to a number of questions with the information directly from the CDC on how safe it is considered to be. So there's a number of things we can refer to for that. But when we do get to that point in time, that population of 5 to 11-year-olds having access to that will also mean that these are a little less impacted. So when we have a quarantine at the high school now, it may start with 15 kids and it ends with 3. But when we have them at the ages where they are not yet able to do that, they can be much bigger. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, kind of where we are with this, without going into additional detail. But I can keep going.
Thank you, Dr. Willett. Madhu?
So I know you touched on this a little bit, but from a majority standpoint, can we tell where these infections are coming from? Are they coming from in school, or are they coming from external? And then,
yeah, I mean, so I'm an epidemiologist, and I always screw that up. And epistemology is like the theory or philosophy. So I would refer to the Eastern, Health District DPH for those questions, but they will probably answer those questions in a manner that says something along the lines of the following. Right now, in school transmission is still extremely low, and I would say that, in my estimation, that's an accurate statement. That most of the things that we are seeing are the result of impacts that are quasi-community impacts. Having said that, I think that extremely low doesn't mean, none. And I think that is, it's always, in the realm of possibility here and anywhere else. But I do think that they're accurate when they say that generally in-school transmission is low.
Do we have any sort of data about the number of kids that get quarantined versus those that eventually test positive or become ill?
The health districts have data on that would be much, because some of these situations, we get contacted by the health district and say these kids are quarantined.
Okay.
And you'll see that play through some of our messaging because we're asked to communicate that. So we sent letters home, for instance, to a bunch of children that were quarantined today. But that information came from the health district and was about an outside thing. So we're not privy to all the information. I think the health district will be the best people to ask about these things in general terms. We do have information, but, and again, most of it is going to be not as comprehensive as the health district will have, because it'll have it for the entire beach and everyone. But from what I can see from just, the situation at hand, and I think the director of nursing would agree with me, we're not really seeing that it is, the vast majority is not in school transmission.
Okay.
But again, that's not none. I mean, and that's not none anywhere in the world, because you can't say that it would, no one can really say that it's none and without being disingenuous about it. But it's really more of just, where's the vast majority of it? The majority is not in schools.
Right, but the question was more, well, at least the second question was more along the lines of, do we have any data of the kids that we have quarantined so far this year have any ended up testing positive?
Yeah, but again, I can't interpret that, yes, there's information about, but first of all, A, I can't share anything about anyone who's not about their own child.
Right. Okay.
And B, I'm not, I can't interpret it.
Okay.
Epidemiology, I can't interpret it. It would have to be one of the health district would have to interpret
Okay.
it. But I'll tell you this, they monitor what we're doing. And so when we send them, we have to go through, file our reports. I have to report with the DPH, every single thing. It's about 15 to 20 steps, and every quarantine takes about 4 to 7 hours. So whenever you see something come out like that, whether it's a group of 3, 5, 7, 9, or whatever, that took about 4 to 7 hours to complete. And all of that is us sending communications and checking off all the boxes. And so they get that information and they have a comprehensive view of things. The district would reach back to us and say, you have to close.
Okay.
We would have been closed already like a week ago if the feeling was that this was from internal transmission. Because there's a lot going on in this community right now, and they have a lot of information about that hasn't happened. But I wouldn't be able to say publish a report without, because I can't go directly into suggesting in any way that it would be this person or that person that did this or didn't do this. I can only rely really on what the health districts tell us to do. And they would tell us to close if we had in-school transmission.
Okay. So
Okay,
it'd
the
be the
massive
health
scale.
district. Okay, thank you. That was it for me.
Thank you, we do.
Yep.
Rena, you're next.
I just wanted to thank you, Dr. Willett, for working on us stepping up our game to support the students that are in quarantine. There's been a number of people who have expressed some levels of frustration and concern and so forth. And I know we talked about it at the last meeting, and I'm just glad that we were moving forward on that. And we are going to be supporting the students who are quarantined in a higher level than what has been prior. So I just wanted to thank you for that.
We'll keep doing that too. Just keep looking to find
Yeah,
ways to add.
to the degree that we need to, I think we have to do that. It's necessary.
Thank you, Rena. Tony, you're next.
No, and really nailed it, is obviously looking at the correspondence that we've been receiving, there haven't been any that said, hey, my quarantine child is learning just as well as they did in school. And so I'm thrilled to see and have no doubt that the district would look into ways of making that right and utilizing what we have. I guess my question is, what kind of feedback loop are we going to be looking at to make sure that what we put in place works, or is there anything better we can do? I mean, how do you get that information? I guess what would you look at to try to adapt?
Well, I guess, not meaning to be glib. I feel like I have a tremendous amount of feedback about how that's going. I have it from the teachers. I definitely have it from parent guardians. I have it from the associate educators. We meet weekly to discuss the status of things. Bi-weekly, weekly, depending on what happens during the week, if they got things they have to focus on, but it is definitely, every week or every other, and it has been a number of times so far. And I asked them also how it's going, what we can do to improve, how we can make things different. I visited every faculty. I still have one left. I went to PGP today, and asked them how it's going, what we can do to adjust, how we can amend it. Every O92 or what's called administrator meeting, I do that. We have weekly COVID meetings where I do that. Includes all stakeholders. Also includes the board at a certain, at a monthly iteration. So we get a tremendous amount of feedback on how things are going, and then we work hard to try to make adjustments accordingly. Also, there are so many ways that I get feedback that I feel like we're locked in very well to the feedback loop and do everything we can to be responsive. The addition of those numbers, those are Microsoft numbers. So one of the feedback items was, not those, but so
They look like fun.
yeah, they are
Let's try
phone
to
numbers,
scroll.
but you can register for phone numbers with Microsoft Teams, for instance. So we found a way to get these individuals' phone numbers without getting cell phones or something for them. And so people said, well, the emails are good, but we don't have any way to reach out directly via phone. So that was another step in the evolution of trying to make that move forward. We're also looking at as many after-school supports as we can. One of the struggles we have right now, and we'll keep doing it, and the feedback that I get, I constantly try to implement something. At the middle school, there's no staff to do an after-school thing. So, so that's one of the things we're trying to ameliorate right now. And a number of us may go down there and actually help directly. The high school is moving into a phase of research and implementation on having some resource after school too. They already do have some, looking to expand that. And when we can get staff for it, looking to expand after school resources in the other schools too. So even after that full day, if people wanted to have a period of interactivity, they could come in and do that. So the next version of this will hopefully have even additional supports, but every bit of feedback I get, I try to incorporate. And I do that in a way that I try to balance all the perspectives too, because it's important that we're not trying to do the thing we did in 2020 either. That can be damaging. So we're trying to find a way forward that is manageable for all parties and provides the best experience possible, understanding that there is a trade-off no matter what you do. So with our associate educators and with the streaming and with the counseling and with the hopefully additional after-school supports that will eventually get in place, I think this is a robust program that will help in many different ways.
Thank you, Dr. Willett. Griffin, then Dana, then I'll go back to you.
That's fine. That's
I'm trying
fine.
to keep order.
It's more than
I'm
that.
writing it down. I'm writing it down.
Thank you, Dr. Willett, for doing this. I think, 2 weeks ago at our last meeting, I think we were all very concerned and we were throwing out, some ideas. I believe it was to do with the passive cameras, which I thought was a fabulous idea. So is that basically, I'm trying to understand like the one directional live audio stream versus the video and audio stream. Why would we not be just doing video? So the whole
Well,
time?
teachers as educational professionals have to have the discretion to decide at any moment in time what's going to be the best choice for the classroom at that moment. So the issue with lots of video and things like that is there can be privacy issues. There can be children that are on their path of growth and change that may express themselves in a classroom in a certain way that may be that day is not the day to have the video on, because once it's out there, it's also out there for the entire community and it's a violation of that child's privacy. So, they have to have the flexibility to say today's going to be an audio or today's going to, because it just has to be at their discretion. And an audio may work more effectively for a teacher who publishes certain things, and then there's an audio feed for it. If they're shooting at the board and have a certain kind of situation going on, that may be perfect for a day to use video and audio. And there may be days that it's better just to pre-record a video or aim them at a video and follow it up with content. But things should be posted on Google Classroom, and then the teacher, as an educational professional in the room, knowing all the situation, knowing the kids and knowing the dynamics, can choose the choice that is the most most considerate of all of the kids' needs and privacy issues that may come up, things like that. So that gives them that flexibility.
Okay, thank you.
You're all set?
Yes.
Dana?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Sorry, sorry for before. It's like it was super echoey and double time, so I didn't know if you guys could hear me. I appreciate Tony's thumbs up, so I got it. First and foremost, I've heard a lot of great feedback from folks in the community about the associate educators. They're really doing what they can with the resources that they have. So I just wanted to, for the record, make sure that we do thank those associate educators who are doing a phenomenal job in a really difficult situation. I'm appreciative of this plan. I know that, again, all of us spoke about it multiple times about, we want to do what's best for all students, whether they're in person or in quarantine through this process. It hasn't been easy. And I think we're going to continue to evolve, and we're going to continue to find better ways week over week, month over month, pandemic period over pandemic period. So I'm really glad that we are making these changes and these adaptive changes. I know when we talked about the passive camera, looking through the lens of an educator, it's tough because it can be defeating in all aspects. They know that student's behind that camera. They know that their students are in front of them. They don't want to dismiss anybody. So making sure that they are executing their curriculum and teaching their class in the best way. No educator wants to leave any student behind. So I appreciate the flexibility of our staff adapting. And again, I think we're going to evolve and things are going to change week over week as we continue to grow and find the best way to navigate this pandemic. And my heart goes out to those families that are in quarantine. It's not fun. I mean, I have a neighbor that's daughter was in quarantine twice in like 3 weeks. I will say that they spoke to you directly, Dr. Willett, and the feedback was, man, this man doesn't rest. They know exactly who my daughter is. They know exactly the situation. You were empathetic, you were sympathetic, and your team was very helpful. Again, there's things that we don't do right, but there are things that we are doing right. And I think that your personal touch has helped tremendously, as well as, like I said, the associate educators and the teachers. I am really glad, we've had some students struggle because they're not able to keep up with the continued evolving curriculum when they are in quarantine. So I don't know what your thoughts are, Dr. Willett, we've talked about it briefly and kind of brushed the surface regarding our COVID relief funds and tapping those to maybe get more associate educators, maybe get some more folks to teach new curriculum, having a more synchronous program. I just was wondering what your thoughts are, short-term and long-term, tapping some of our COVID funds that we have here in town.
I think that it would be very useful to have available funds that we could do that with. The associate educators, the more of them we have, the better, because they can, link up with families when there's a burst of, of cases. And, that they've been some of the most useful with respect to doing the follow-up and making sure the connection stays there. You'll see that, when we have a situation like we did 2 weeks ago, where we had a large number, 19 and 19 kind of hit within the 24-hour period, that's more than the associate educator can handle. So I had to move over the one from the high school and realign some other people up there to try to address the situation. The more associates we have, the better off we'll be this year. And that's just a fact about it. And parent guardians will feel much more supported if we can get more associate educators, and the CRF funds be helpful in that manner should they continue with the town. In the past, there was kind of a thing that let's not use them for personnel. I would like to use them for personnel this year. And it is dollars that you'll notice, and we did have savings for that, were things that we did recover. So it makes sense to use them in that manner, because at the end of this year, you'll notice that parent guardians, when they do talk about this, the more contact they get, the better they feel, the more of that direct contact. And that one teacher cannot make contact. So middle school teacher has 100 children, 100, somewhere in the 80 to 100 zone. When I taught 4 sections of that Skills for Adolescents, I had like 80 some odd kids. Trying to do that for 80 children is not a possible thing, but if you have associate educators and you get a percentage of kids that are quarantined, that associate educator can help make that connection continue to be vibrant and be there. So even if 10% of your population is done, as a quarantine position for your school, and then there's multiplied by other grades or whatever, like happened the other day, and it turned out to be 38. Those teachers will work to try to make the connection, but the associate educators are dedicated to that the whole day. They're not teaching a class. They can do more of the calling, more of the interacting. They are going to be how we make this work even better this year. And I think people's experience with it will be, will be felt to be very good, even, super supportive, the more of them that we have. So that's really important, and if we're able to do that, we could add more to the ranks, and I think that'd be very helpful. We do also need to have people that are able to do that job, So that's the other thing we're struggling with, is making sure we can find these individuals. And staffing across the entire state is a struggle for almost any entity, schools, businesses, everyone. So, assuming we can find them, bringing them on board is important. And I think we can. We've been working hard to do that. So.
Thank you, Dr. Willett.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I think it's important. I'm sorry, Christine, I'll wrap it up. I'll put a little bow tie on it. I think it's important that we know that this situation is so fluid and ever evolving. And I just want to make sure that our folks, like our community, has been emailing us, which is fantastic. And then, I think this, the superintendent's office, as well as your respective administrator's office, have been really wanting to work with the families to ensure that we address this problem. Again, it's ever evolving. That's all I have to say. And I do appreciate your candor and the staff's flexibility with this as we go through this, Dr. Watt. Thank you. Thank you, Christina.
Go to Madhu and then Jacob.
You can go first. I've already gone, so.
Okay, Jacob, then
Yeah,
Madhu.
Okay, I'll keep it brief. Yeah, I'll just reiterate a couple points people said. I am very happy to see this come out. I think that this definitely will help answer a lot of the concerns brought forward by different parents. And I think Tony brought up an important point that I was going to say, is just to continue to utilize that feedback loop and to kind of view this as a starting point and maybe see what can be improved. At the end of the day, though, it is absolutely a difficult situation that isn't necessarily, actually, I'll be stronger than that. It's not our staff's fault that we're in this situation. It's requirements from the state that are completely out of our control. And I think that this is certainly a good effort to try to address the struggles with quarantines. That's my 2 cents.
No, thank you. I have this in my notes to say too, and I missed it, and I just want to say I'm deeply thankful for your efforts of making a bad situation infinitely better, in my opinion. I think this is going to help a lot of kids, not even just from an educational standpoint, but from an isolation standpoint. So I just wanted to thank you.
Madhu. Anybody else? I just had a couple things to say. I love that we're doing more for the kids in quarantine. I think I've made it no secret that I think the quarantines, I just want them to go away. I feel like Madhu's question about data on close contacts, how many of them actually get COVID after having that close contact in school, would be pertinent to the argument of, are the quarantines necessary or not? I would love to see, and maybe, you don't have to talk about this now, Dr. Willett, but on this plan, perhaps some advocacy at the state level to get a test and stay protocol that some of the other states are doing, so that when there is a close contact, kids can stay in school by testing. It seems to be working well in Massachusetts. So that's all I had, but thank you though for supporting those families, because we did get a lot of emails. So with that, anybody else? No? We'll move on to Washington, DC.
So I'm just trying to get this thing to cooperate. I apologize. Kind of jumped around. Okay, so, trying to do this one first, so people at home can see this. So there's a lag, I apologize. So as I try to click on it, I'm trying to navigate. Indicating it is not responding. I will click again. Restart. Okay. So this will open eventually, and when it does, I will continue just so people at home can see. Or maybe it'll just start and then it'll eventually follow. Washington, and really not just Washington, the topic for this agenda is Washington. But field trips in a more broad sense, there's been so many things this year that we really had to struggle with to figure out, what's the path forward that we can take. And there's been no shortage of regulation and 13G and all kinds of things with respect to personnel. Many things, it's a very narrow path that the district has to walk. New things added that we constantly have to adjust to. And every Monday I go through staff lists of who has tested and who has maybe not tested and have to follow. And there's so many different things that we do. So when we look at field trips, we have to make a practical, or my job here for you is to make a practical decision about what we can operational, logistically, and safely execute. That is my job. It's also under 51. My obligation under 5150 stipulates that that is under the operational domain of the superintendent. So that anything that lasts more than 1 day requires the approval of the superintendent, and then approval meaning also if you have a COVID pandemic, that various pieces of this have to be put in place in a way that lives up to the obligations of the district to provide a safe safe experience, and one that we feel that we can execute. So when I consider things like field trips, and again this particular one is specific to Washington as per the desire of the board, but the plan, the continuity of learning plan, describes the strategy here for field trips in general and the policy and practice for field trips in general under the pandemic for Tolland for this year. None of this I particularly want, and I don't want to be imposing anything, frankly. This is a very difficult situation. I am very saddened by what I feel like I have to execute as my responsibilities. And I did talk to many stakeholders with respect to what we potentially would need to be doing with anything related to the pandemic, including field trips. So broadly considered things with respect to this trip are vaccines and testing requirements of venues, length of time a testing result is considered viable for access to venues and places, consultation with the health district, the tour company, the school administration, the legal representation, trip advisors, and others. More specifically, given the trip runs many nights from Tuesday to Friday, a test prior to the trip would not be sufficient to provide 72-hour exemption to venues that allow a testing option. So it would not be something we could use for the entire trip. Venues and businesses almost exclusively require paper or digital records, so we couldn't do some test on the trip and hold up a swab that was colored green and say, hey, this child's okay. That's not how that works. Students are 4 to a room and spend multiple nights together unmasked. The students in the Washington trip are in a room unmasked and sleeping at night, and that is how that interaction occurs. They are adolescents at the middle school level. So the potential here for a situation that would be undesirable is high. And so that's just a factor of the situation. Students, mentors, and guides share common coach buses for a 6-hour duration ride. And there's many additional hours spent together on these coach buses. Students with COVID-19 on the trip, basically, the tricky part about the pandemic is that if a child has what looks like COVID-19 symptoms, you have to consider the child symptomatic. And what's hard about this is it's hard to translate this kind of thing into everybody's daily experience, but I live this 24 hours a day right now. If somebody is, and families know this, if somebody, if there is a child who's symptomatic and you call the school, and particularly in a situation that they may be in there, you have to consider the child as having, being symptomatic of COVID. And that means that you may have to put in a quarantine just for being symptomatic. So an unvaccinated student who's symptomatic, could result in a quarantine. And when you ride on these buses, the trick in a situation like that is kids sometimes, they don't feel well. They don't feel well because they're on a bus for 6 hours. They're not usually on a bus for 6 hours. So they may have symptoms. It'll be a very tough situation for people to process through, because somebody who's sick to their stomach could vomit when they get it, because they get, whatever, your car sick. And now the people on trip have to decide whether they're doing that because the child is, is that a symptom of COVID, which it can be. So it creates a whole nother layer of situations. Any vaccinated kids that are not feeling sick don't have to quarantine. Any unvaccinated child that is starting to feel sick at all could potentially take out and have to result in a quarantine for a bunch of children on that trip at any point in the trip. And that would mean that we have to divide the groups. We have to isolate individuals, and dividing groups and isolating individuals diminishes the value of the trip for all the participants. The logistics of splitting the groups has safety issues. It has safety and management implications. Quarantines could require separate transportation options, could require separate rooms, separate spaces for the kids under quarantine, and separate supervision, which means that the remaining group will not have the same supervision because they'll have to be routed over to maintain supervision of the quarantine population. Businesses have a right to require proof of vaccination as the only acceptable condition for admittance, and they can do that on a short notice. So if I own Walt's Pizza and somebody in my family dies of COVID in the time between, we're leaving and that time, and I decide that I'm not going to allow anyone in my establishment that doesn't have a vaccination, I have the right to do that. And that could be somewhere that the kids were going to go, that now we have 3 busloads of kids we have to reroute because we can't go there because we will not be able to get in. Not only that, these kind of last minute changes or splitting of groups increase the logistical and safety problems. It's unsafe to have situations like that occur and then have to have them making adjustments when there's no, when that can happen on a very short notice. Venues can require vaccination or a negative test within 72 hours of access, but they can change that requirement on a very short span of time. So even though a venue, might be in a situation where they're, asking vaccination or test status, they can go all vaccination. That happened in San Francisco, that happened in New York City, it happens in some municipal area, some of these larger urban areas in the United States. And there's no reason why that could not happen here. So the problem is that there's so much uncertainty around this. It creates logistical issues, it creates safety issues. It could greatly diminish the value of the trip for the people that are on it. And it's something that when I did start to ask around and try to get some clarity on, I was told that there are tour guides may not want to, they have a harder time finding tour guides for the groups that are not vaccinated groups or that haven't shown proof of vaccination. Some of that increases all kinds of issues, obviously, for the kids if they get down there, because you also can't bring a group of kids that are close contact into a rest stop. If you have a bunch of kids that ended up being in close contact on a trip, you're not supposed to really bring them into any public space. It's, so every time I talked and every time I kind of reached out to different people on this, trying to figure out how we could safely have trips, our field trip policy during the pandemic does take into account what we feel like we can execute reasonably. And then for trips like this that are beyond the scope of a 72-hour PCR test, it's just too much. It's just too much. It's too much to ask the staff to do. There's too many, variables that could go wrong. It's not the responsible thing for me to do to suggest that this, even if it's an unpopular thing to say, it is not a responsible thing for me to do to suggest that a trip of this kind could be done without requiring vaccinations at this time. Also, people would have to give the money for their deposits and could lose the money for their deposits because you don't get your money back typically for a change in a venue status. You may get it if your child got COVID before leaving for the trip, but generally you're not getting money back because the venue decided to change or that the individual businesses decided to change. That's typically not how that would work either. So people could lose their money. And it just didn't seem like a fair thing to take people's money for a situation that could be so, could have so many potential ways of turning into a miserable experience for them. I wish that this weren't the case, but this is the case that, this is the situation that we're dealing with right now. And I have talked to the trip advisors, I've talked to the health district, I've talked to the tour company, I've talked to the legal and the lawyers about that. I've talked to all of these individual, groups or stakeholders to try to determine how and what leeway I had. And that field trip policy does show what leeway that we have with respect to some of this. Another example would be if you go to Boston right now and you go to a stadium seems to be at this moment in time allowing for vaccination or test. If it's an overnight trip to Boston and you're going to a stadium, you can do that with a negative PCR test and be within a 72-hour window. So the chances are there wouldn't be something that converted over. Delta is highly contagious, but that's an overnight trip. And if there were an issue, you're 1.5 hours away from home. This is a much different situation with many more possibilities for it to be a health and safety problem. And so that's why this is put forward the way that it is.
Okay.
I have questions.
All right, so I saw Madhu, Greeny, Griffin. I'm
Okay,
gonna go in order.
all right, fair enough.
And then Tony.
This is kind of a Hail Mary, and I don't know if this is even feasible, but is there any way we can have families sign some sort of like hold harmless agreement where like they relieve us of all liability if something were to happen?
So really the situation at hand here is that I don't think that would really help us with respect to the trip, because the issue is when we get down there. The variability of their safety. First of all, the venues they don't care about that agreement.
Right.
The venues and the businesses make their own choice. They're either dictated by the urban area or by the state or by the federal government in some extent. And so, an individual business owner does not care what you've signed per se. That doesn't mean they may not give access if they don't, if the child or the person doesn't have vaccination, prior proof of vaccination. Also, this is about safety and logistics. And I used to run these trips too. You cannot on a dime suddenly have all of this change. And now this group of kids has to go back to the hotel and these 2 rooms are now filled with 2 kids that are close contacts. The health districts, the things that have to then be engaged at that point, the people and that could happen at any point in that trip, and that's it. And that group is out and the rest of the supervision is diminished. It's just that, I wish that weren't the case. I really do. But it has more to do with, can we reasonably safely execute this without major logistical issues or compromising the value of the trip for, kids vaccinated and unvaccinated, if that was the situation. And, not having the guarantee of the access, how quickly it can shift, all of those things. Certainly, we wouldn't have to worry about a family suing us in that situation, but it's not. There isn't a mistrust of families here. That's not the core. It's not the issue. The issue is, can we logistically do this in a safe way? And can I stand there and say to everybody, and say that I think this would be, a safe trip, doing it without requiring vaccination. And I don't. I don't think it would be. I think it has many issues. Could be a deep loss of value for the families. It could make a miserable experience for the kids. And it's all basically because of the pandemic and the requirements and how these things can shift and change. It has nothing to do with trusting a family or not, or having them sign away their liability, and everything to do with can we safely, logistically do this without imperiling them or creating an unreasonable environment for the people that are on it as mentors or the children that are experiencing it. The answer is no, I can't. But with vaccination, that's, you do have more options. You don't have to react the same way to things. Kids that are not symptomatic do not have to be quarantined. There's no such thing in a pandemic having no impact, but the impact would be massively smaller than it would be with a series or a group of kids that are unvaccinated on this trip.
Okay. Somewhat related question, but is there any way to open this trip up to freshmen, this year's freshmen, who were not able to go last year because it was canceled? I've had a few parents ask me that, ask the question.
I think if that were desired, what we might want to do is look to plan a sophomore trip from the high school or something outside of the pandemic year, rather than try to do something right now for the same reasons why this is an issue. If there was an existing trip, I would say let's try it. Otherwise, I would say because we're already engaged in a trip, but we'd have to follow the same parameters. I would recommend if people are interested in that we look at next year a trip for sophomores at the high school who missed that opportunity. And hopefully by next year, we don't have these issues. We're not bound by these very unpredictable circumstances. The other thing just to throw out there, Delta is very contagious. It's very contagious. It's 5 times more, and we are seeing that. We are definitely seeing that. And the last 2 weekends are examples of that. So this is not the same coronavirus. This is a much more contagious version of it. And being on a bus for 6 hours with unvaccinated kids is, given the experience that I have with this, doing it for 20 months now, has a high possibility for being extremely miserable for a significant group of those people. And I can't say, hey, you know what, I'm going to ignore everything I know, all the experience over the last 20 months, and all of the input that I got on this, and just say, it'll be fine. Because it won't. That's not how, I can't do that. And so people may not be happy with it, and I get it. And I wish that wasn't the case. And I'm very sad about it myself. And I would work hard to try to find a way of ameliorating that in the future. Maybe running a trip for next year, or running a combined trip at the high school to make up for what happened this year to the kids. But I can't tell you in this year that this is the right decision, because I think it's the wrong one.
Sure.
And that's why it's laid out the way it is.
I think that's a pretty reasonable, response. That's fine by me. I did have one other question pertaining to homecoming. I don't know if this is the appropriate time to ask the question, because I don't see any other agenda where I could, but.
Sure.
Okay, so someone asked me to ask this question. We know that vaccinated people can still pass the virus. Is there a reason why only unvaccinated kids have to test prior to going to homecoming, and the vaccinated do not?
Yeah, everything here, with respect to the pandemic is a scale question. It's a scale question. And although it is possible to have someone who is vaccinated get, the coronavirus, it is much more unlikely, to the point that it is statistically significantly less likely than it would be otherwise. And so when we look at this, all of these rules that we're given, and again, we're just charged with making sense of them and applying them. A child who is vaccinated right now, who is sitting right next to someone who's COVID positive, does not have to stay out of school. And because, and the reason for that is the chance of that person becoming infected is so significantly less that they feel like it's safe for them to still be in school. So they're basing their advice and their directives on this. And we have to then apply that, in other realms. So, with respect to a dance, because it's so much more significantly likely that a person who's unvaccinated could come in and infect others, then it makes sense to then say, like we would for almost anything else, and the state says as well, and then you say as well, and in every other of these instances, it says as well, that that you would test and provide a negative test before having access to a mass event with many people in one place at one time. So yeah, because it's so significantly less a chance of happening, that's generally why. And that's generally why across the board and how that's applied in many other places too. So if they have proof of, negative PCR test before the dance within 72 hours of it, then that's the pass in, or the vaccination status is the pass in.
That was it.
Thank you, Madhu. Rainey?
Okay, well, so, Dr. Bullitt, I appreciate that you're, looking at all the risk factors, obviously, to protect the school and the students, so that is great. I think, one of the questions that I have is the trips in May, and we're canceling it already. And, we know COVID, this whole thing changes like all the time. So I'm wondering if we're not jumping the gun a little bit, and could we not have waited to make the decision, given that, there's like an 8-week prior to the trip buffer where parents could get their deposits back and that sort of thing. And I could be wrong on some of those, so I get that. But in conjunction with that, maybe like, have we considered, if in fact this is absolutely, there's just no way that we can put off the decision, I mean, have we considered other options where the kids would be on a shorter trip, where the 72-hour thing would work, and that type of a thing, so that we're not completely obliterating the trip, but maybe looking at some other possibilities to do.
So, and thank you for asking. The conditions, first of all, there's timelines here and deposits that people can lose and so on. And that was trying also to be sensitive to that. But, and it is hard because there's obviously many months between now and the trip. And I guess the problem is that I would have never imagined that the Delta variant would be 5 times more contagious. And whether we are talking, than the coronavirus we were dealing with in March, April, May of that beginning time. And even last year, Delta wasn't even on our radar. And then suddenly, not that many months later, we're dealing with 5 times more contagious variant. And the thing about it is whether it's Delta or something else, and if it was horribly something else, everything changes for everyone. But the Delta variant, for instance, people that are vaccinated are 90 to 95% protected against hospitalizations and death. And this kind of thing, there seems to be this situation where, because of that, policy, procedures, requirements, the kinds of things that are set forth, they're not going to change that much between now and May if, with respect to people who are vaccinated or not vaccinated. There's a chance that they could, but there's a chance that they wouldn't. And there's so much unpredictable and so much out of our control that trying to make a choice, of this kind and know all of that is really impossible. So I just have to make the decision the best I can at the moment in time that we're at, and then try to do our best to, in the future, if there are kids that missed out on the trip, run another trip, at the high school level for 9th and 10th graders, or do something like that to give the kids an option that they didn't have this year. But 7 months ago, it was a really different situation, and we weren't dealing with that 5 times more contagious Delta the way we are now. So, it's just because I don't know what direction it can go in, I have to react with the information and the guidance that we have now. And I could not ever do anything different than that. So if somebody was unvaccinated 5 months from now versus vaccinated, the chances that that's still not going to be part of our picture, they're there, but they're not super strong given the circumstances. I also expect that when vaccinations open, even for the 5 through 11-year-olds, for example, I don't think that everyone's going to get them. I think 50%, possibly will get them, and I think the other 50% will not. So I think that on some level there may be a reduced impact for us, but not a completely diminished one. And I think San Francisco and other urban areas, New York City, have gone wildly, in different directions based on what's happened, and then suddenly imposed things. So it's just a factor of what's not possible to predict this year, and then making a decision based on the information that I have at hand right now. And this is not a decision on a Washington trip. This was a decision about field trips. And that applies in that plan across field trips. There are conditions to which we can run them in a certain way, and then there are reasons and conditions that we could not run them. And so it's in the pandemic plan. And there was an attempt to be, as robust as possible with respect to who we can take. The conditions of the field trip in Washington are unique. It's a much longer period of time, a much greater time that they are inside a bus together, not only for the trip down and the trip back, but also intermittently. And we have very little control over the venues, and they're not very close to home. All those factors mean that running another trip when we get out of the pandemic, when the kids are in high school, would be a much better option than trying to do something this year that could end in a very miserable situation for kids.
I think it is ending in a miserable situation for them, unfortunately, but I guess I was just like thinking, well, couldn't we wait till January to make the decision, would be what I was thinking, because we still have plenty of time. We don't know. I think back to the graduation, and we weren't gonna have graduation because of all the situations, and then within a couple months, things kind of eased up and we were able to do it. So that was some of what I was thinking. We don't have to continue hashing it out. That's just my
So I think the
kind of
tour
viewpoint
company,
a little bit on it.
no, because the tour company needs time to make that work. That was my impression of it. You can't do it in January, February. They need the time. That's why the first deposit is due in October, and then subsequent deposits along the way, because they have to plan things in advance for that large of people. It's not like getting in a car and going down there like, as a family. This is the logistics of 3 busloads of children, and their access to things has to be managed and planned. And so that company does plan and manage those. And that timeline is the company's.
You okay? Griffin?
Thank you. I don't really have any questions because clearly this is a done decision. It's not a board decision, but I do want to put my thoughts on this. I'm very disappointed at this decision. I think it's going to cause a lot of heartache. I think it's going to cause a lot of division. I think it's going to be talked about for the next 6 months. And it's going to be, well, I'm going on a trip and you're not. I don't know how that's going to go. So I'm disappointed that we're not focusing on perhaps a secondary itinerary. So I have the 2019 itinerary in my hand, and I Googled just about all of these things. And as of now, even with the Delta variant, nothing but the Kennedy Center is requiring vaccinations. All of the Smithsonian's are open. Everybody ages 2 and up has to wear a mask, regardless of vaccination status. So I'm disappointed that we're not kind of taking that into consideration and figuring out a way to make this work. I also think that as far as the insurance and the risk to parents, I think the parents should have a choice. If they want to risk their deposit, if they want to risk their 762 2 years ago, I'm not sure what it is today. Okay. I think that they should have the choice to risk that deposit. And, I know I'm looking at this as well. And yes, at least 2 years ago, 8 weeks before the trip, you could cancel and you would get all your money back except for $300. So I just feel like that's a choice that parents should have to still be able to do that. And then I guess my final point would be that no trip is going to be perfect. There's always going to be a risk of any trip. And I will use the 2013 trip that my daughter went on. The government was shut down for 3 weeks that year in October. They were going Veterans Day weekend. I can still remember sitting in the auditorium during the government shutdown and the tour company saying, we have no idea what's going to happen. If the government does not open up, we are going to have to figure out different activities for these kids. And there's the possibility that we might have to cancel this trip. I remember that vividly. And I think the government opened up right around maybe the 20th of October. So we had a couple weeks to spare. And something else that just I remembered about this trip that I just confirmed with my daughter who was home this past weekend. They had a massive bout of food poisoning on that trip. And several kids had to be kind of quarantined, if you will, because they didn't know exactly what it was. Stuff is going to happen. I understand that it's a little different than a pandemic, but I'm just disappointed that we're not kind of figuring out a way to make this happen when we have 6 months left. And just kind of what you brought up with graduation, you know, we thought at the time we couldn't have an in-person graduation because I think it was the EHHD, so we're going to kill grandma. And that didn't happen. And I understand that it could have happened, but this just seems so premature to me to make this decision and to completely basically brush aside the unvaccinated kids. And I just find it really unfair. I'm sorry, I'm just very upset about this, but that's all I have.
Well, I mean, I need to comment on that. Food poisoning is not a virus. Right now, if one kid got food poisoning and they were unvaccinated, they would be considered potentially symptomatic or positive, and everybody around them would be then quarantined. That is not a threat. That is actually the rules of the health district. And I do not feel that's respectful to me. I worked very hard for this district, and to call what I just said a threat, it's a fact that if somebody is symptomatic on a trip, they would need to consider them as potentially COVID positive and quarantine them. This is not a Walt made that rule. This is the logistics of the situation we're in, which means that that situation you just described would result in quarantine for multiple days of the entire group of kids, and they would have missed out on everything that they were paid to experience. If we can create a trip the next year that takes that into account, it'll be a much better experience for them. We're not talking about a situation that has to do simply with venues. We're talking about if they go down there and become symptomatic, that's the stomach, that's my head hurts, or I have, congestion. Any of those things have to be considered positive. They're ambiguous, and then those kids end up being quarantined. What I don't accept here is the notion that I just don't care about these kids, or that I'm threatening anyone, or that I'm trying to do this in a way that is somehow disrespectful or ruling out kids. I'm being very honest and frank with this community about the rules we have to follow and what impact those rules could have on this trip for these kids to go down there. And I'm suggesting we potentially find another way to do a much better trip for them in the future. And for those that could be, avoiding all of those kinds of situations, the vaccination status does that for some of them for this particular trip. There are places that have canceled all trips altogether of this kind because they just don't want to deal with this. I'm trying to find a way to help make it happen and then find other options for people to find, other ways to do it. So, again, this work that I'm doing is I'm trying to do the best work for the district. To suggest I'm threatening or to suggest that somehow I do not care about these children is disrespectful and unacceptable to me.
I'm sorry if I used the word threat. I don't remember using
You
that
did not
word.
use the word threat.
Oh, okay.
I heard the word threatening. That it was
Oh, I
threatening.
didn't say I said norovirus spreads. I didn't say threat.
Well, I
But,
apologize.
and I do think it's important because this is the first time I'm hearing about an alternative trip, perhaps for these kids. Has that been presented to the unvaccinated students that we are going to try to do something for them at a later date?
Well, I mean, I would do anything that I could for these kids, alternative trip, any other aspect of anything that's considered, I have said repeatedly that I would take advice on anything people had, and I would try to do anything I could. That's never been different. And if we can offer, an alternative trip in the future for these kids in 10th, 9th grade, we would do that. I don't see any reason why we cannot do that. But the foci of the conversation hasn't been on anything like that. It's been strictly on whether this, basically this trip and the circumstances around it. And again, there's very definitive reasons for that. And I guess the hard part about this is it's hard to communicate how this can be so impactful to these kids when they're on the trip. So the example you gave, Ms. Griffin, of having food poisoning, it is not like a normal trip, and it would be interpreted totally differently in this case because they couldn't necessarily narrow it down. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that this isn't the normal trip with the normal times and the normal rules and all of that. It's a much different situation, and it has many more opportunities to really negatively affect everybody that's participating. So that's why I'm throwing it out there that way. But I have seen a lot of communications that suggest that it's just that we don't care, or that it's somehow trying to create suffering, or that it's taking a political position. I'm looking strictly at the logistical situations with this trip and saying that we're going to have to manage it this way this year, and it opens up all kinds of opportunities when we get out of this.
Tony was next, then Jacob. Dana, okay, Dana didn't have.
All right, thank you. So I guess I want to look at this in a slightly different way. It should surprise nobody that I'm concerned about the policy shift, you know, and I think Ms. Griffin said something that just caught my ear and was a segue here when she said that, you know, she recognized that this is not a board decision, and tying into what you said earlier, that we're not talking about just a single trip. This is not just DC, this is field trips, to the point you made just a minute ago. And that they're just massive things that have to be looked at, massive things that have to be discussed. 5150, which was revised, you know, 2007, had no clue that something like this would be a consideration, or that in planning this trip, you would have to figure out the what ifs and how these things came about. So if you had come before, you know, the group, or in the document with the incredibly long name had said, you know what, we just can't do trips over a certain amount of time, then got it. That certainly makes sense. But instead, what it seems like we're doing is we're redefining the vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And we're saying that field trips now, if you're vaccinated, this is what can happen. If you're not vaccinated, this is what can happen. And so I wonder if a paradigm shift on that level is a board, if that's a policy change, if that's something that normally would have multiple reviews and then discussion and vote for the board. If that's what has to happen when we're starting to shift this much, as opposed to just a single thing.
So 5150 does explicitly state vaccinations in its regulation. That's one of the things back in 2007, it even talks about considering this vaccination.
5150.
The policy for field trips, the policy and regulation together, the policy gives that superintendent that responsibility or burden. And the regulation talks about vaccinations back in 2007.
5150.
It's the regulation 5150. Yeah. So, you know, this has been something that has been in sort of legal process for these, you know, this is Shipley and Goodwin who, you know, talks about these things. And to Mr. Holt's point, I wish that we weren't in a situation where I had to make all kinds of pandemic, you know, related, you know, decisions. This is a situation where we have to make a tremendous number of pandemic related decisions, and field trips are not immune to, you know, no pun intended, or maybe pun intended, to these decisions. Field trips are not immune. They're another school programmatic thing that is, you know, even back in 2007 in Reg 5150, vaccinations are mentioned. This is part of what we are supposed to be considering. And please believe me when I say, I don't want to be doing that. That's not what I want to be doing. I don't want to be putting anything in place that hurts any child or any family. It's simply that with these things laid out, we have to look at what these requirements are and how they can affect our operations. So it's been there even back in that time.
And make no mistake, I'm not disagreeing with you, and you're right. I do see where the virus, I missed it on that one. It is a regulation. My concern is that discussion and that decision has to come out here. I think that becomes a much larger, it's saying that this group can do this, which this group cannot, you know, and that becomes then a board discussion.
I understand the feeling on that. I think that what you're looking at is not that this policy is doing that as much as, even though it does mention vaccinations, it's that the federal government and the state government have done it. So we have lots of policies, and we had, you know, the pandemic, and then we had executive orders, and we had, you know, Executive Order 13G. There's no policy in there that says that your superintendent should be doing weekly testing and that mandatory testing for all employees. There's no policy for that. There is absolutely nothing in our policies that demands weekly testing for all employees, but I have to do it. So we're not talking about what we would normally be doing. And hopefully in a year from now, we will not be having or to not have to do these things. But this is overlaid upon us right now. And I suppose, we can rewrite everything to match what they're saying now, and in about 6 to 12 months, they won't be saying it anymore. So, or maybe it'll be different, just like the flexibility document we're talking about next was different last year than it is this year. The difference, an executive order. So, the thing about it is that this isn't just, hey, let's just do this for the sake of doing it. Whether it's a field trip or it's the employees we have, or it's the policies about what people have to wear in school, AKA a mask, none of these things would normally have been part of what we would ever do. But they're all part of what we have to do now. And to say that then they could be ignored for something like that, it just, it doesn't match with how everything else is happening.
And that's not really the direction I'm going. You're right. My direction is, if you recall, similar, there was executive orders last year when this was all really getting fired up, that due to the necessity of speed, said that certain things were the superintendent's responsibility in the state board. Now that we move forward to what we have now, and recognizing that on an operational level, those things still apply, but on the additional level, when we're starting to do things like this, my thought is that becomes the board, that we have to get together as a group of 10 here and have those discussions.
And ultimately, the board can decide what it wants to do with a variety of things. I think you'll find that as we pursue these kinds of things, that people will weigh in on policy, just like Shippen and Goodwin, for instance, will weigh in on policies with various advisements, what they do think you should do, what they don't think you should do. CABE has that. We can either follow what CABE says, follow what Shippen says, or whatever. And I think you'll probably find in most boilerplates that your chief executive officer is the place where these decisions are made. In any normal situation, there are certain things that require board approval, and we do bring things to the board in general and so on. But that, generally in a normal situation, your chief executive officer is given and empowered to do a number of different things for you. So the board doesn't have to do approvals of every single this or that type of thing. And they're written that way for, reasons of operational functionality, right? The pandemic changed all of that. I am looking at people's testing status. I don't think I would ever had the right to do that ever. I'm ordered by an executive order to do this, to review this every Monday. We're not talking about the typical situation. And I think when we exit the pandemic, hopefully that these kinds of things will return to normal. Shippen will offer you the model policy with your superintendent having operational things and the board having policy setting things. And generally we follow that, and that's how we move along. But we're operating under right now a pandemic status. 700,000 people have died in the United States. They are responding to that by making all of the things they're making and putting all these executive orders and requirements on the schools. And I'm in the unenviable position, frankly, of trying to figure out how to parse all of that and continue to keep this district and the boards and the children's best interest in mind and moving forward, and the staff. And I feel that I'm doing that. I feel that this is another way that I'm doing that. And I get that I'm very saddened by this. I really had trouble with this. I did not want this to be how this played out. But I also thought at the end of the day, I can't stand up and claim to try to be a person of integrity and say that this is going to work, that this doesn't have many perils to it. My job is to say, watch out. This has many perils to it. This could be a logistical operational problem. This may turn into something that would work out very poorly for a number of people. That's my job. And that's what I'm doing. So, but again, these things written back in 2007, considering vaccinations, but when you leave it, it's going to have, you're still going to have the hopefully normal things returning. And in those normal operations, the policy recommendations would probably be to have your chief executive officer do many of the things that it says in there that they do. And frankly, I knew this was not going to be, something people loved. I mean, I knew it, and I can't make my decision based on, do I think there's going to be people who, hate me for this or don't like it. I have to make it based on, what I feel like is following the, the logical rules of the pandemic that were laid down and giving, providing the safe, and effective trip that will not result in, issues or misery for our staff or the kids.
You all set, Tom?
Yeah, I agree, and I understand, Dr. Willett, what you're saying. I just, in closing, I think this is the level of decision that should have been brought up to the board. With your, obviously, as as our expert, as our CEO, your recommendation would have absolutely been taken into account. But even though we are operating in absolutely unique times, and that a lot of those responsibilities, both operational and really steering the ship, fall upon your shoulders, and you're doing wonderfully. We can't forget that the board has a certain responsibility here in holding that guidance and kind of keeping an eye on that direction. And I feel like we're remiss if all we're doing is listening and not being an active part of it.
Thank you, Tom. Was it Jacob?
Jacob.
And then Madhu, and then you?
I'll be quick.
Yeah. Well, every time someone talks, I think of something else I want to say.
You get two.
Yes. Anyway, so I won't rehash, the whole debate about the risk reward conversation with COVID and young kids, or debate the wisdom of entities that are above us with regard to regulations and rules, which played a role up in determining Dr. Willett's decision. All I would like to ask is that, this not be the last time we discuss this topic, especially if there is the possibility for some sort of trip to make it up to students a couple of years down the road. I've got some sympathy for Tony's position that this may have been better if it was brought to the board. That's not that I don't have a vote of confidence in Dr. Willett. It's more just given how sensitive the issue is and how precious the event is to the community. I think that an event of that nature is worth discussing more with the community representatives, which is what the board is. And especially if we do some sort of makeup trip, or if that is any sort of possibility, we would have a little bit more time to plan that theoretically. So I think this would be a good opportunity for us to discuss that. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
I see Dana's hand up. Do you mind if I say, go to Dana so that I can go around place? Dana,
Thank you, Christina. I appreciate it. I know it's hard to try to navigate in person and over remote. So first and foremost, I mean, this is just a tough situation for all. It's just another situation in the pandemic that our poor students have lost a situation, and it's tough because I don't think there's any correct answer, I guess. I want to reiterate what Jacob said. I definitely think we need to keep this conversation going, because I think, Dr. Willett, you had mentioned about potentially having another opportunity for this class on a future time to do this trip. I think that's paramount for it. I guess the things that I get concerned with is, with the amount of hours that you and your team are contact tracing here in Connecticut and here in Tolland, let alone being you here in Tolland and them doing their trip in DC and try to work with your team and contact trace and quarantine and that. I think that's something that we definitely need to discuss. And unfortunately there's things that our hands are tied to, or your hands are tied, Dr. Willett. It's just not under our purview, right? It's the direction of the HHD and CDC and the rules of regulations of the places that they're going to be going to visit, and like you said, the restaurants and buses and blah, 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 blah. It's not just one entity making this decision, it's multiple. So I think, making sure that we take care of this class and try to do what we can in a year going forward or 2 years going forward, whatever this may be. I think it's paramount to keep that on our radar, on our short-term and long-term radar. But again, I mean, I couldn't even start to fathom how many hours that you and your team spend contact tracing just within our 4 buildings, let alone, going to DC. Again, my heart breaks for these students. My heart breaks for these families who, this is a big trip. This is a big to do. I mean, DC is a big trip. I mean, it's huge. It's huge for their educational experience. It's huge for an opportunity. It's an opportunity for these young minds to really understand the nucleus, of what our government is and our nation's capital and all of that. So I definitely think it's very important to keep it top of mind. I mean, again, I don't know what the answer is. Again, my heart breaks for these students, but I do appreciate all the effort going through it and to doing our best that we can for all students. Again, it's ever evolving. It's not tomorrow. It's not next month. I definitely think that, as everything progresses, just as our I hate to say continuity of learning or remote learning or quarantine learning is going to change, I think this conversation might look very different in a month or 2 months. So I'd like to put a pin on it and continue to talk about it over our next board meetings as well. But thank you for your thorough information, Dr. Willett, and the hard work. And again, like I said, I'll reiterate what Jacob said, is just let's see if we can't make it right for this class at a different time. So thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Madhu?
Okay. So I think by far the solution with the least amount of harm would be to do an alternate trip, because it's not like we're talking about just students this year. It's a whole other 8th grade class that missed out completely. I would like to explore that, and whenever the next board takes over, I think that would be, I would definitely appreciate it. Just a suggestion, or I don't even know if this is even really a viable possibility, but let's say an unvaccinated student wanted to go, and that parent would be willing to go there with them, have that child stay with them in their hotel. That parent would be responsible for, getting them tested, and stuff like that. I mean, I don't even know if that's something that's a viable solution.
Well, usually it's 4 to a room that, the parent would need to be additionally added to the structure of
Like they would
where
get their
they
own
are,
room.
where they are. I guess they could pay for their own, but things like that, even in a normal year, typically the district does not do that, doesn't have that kind of situation, because it just adds additional layers of cost and other things.
Okay.
Plus the kids, sometimes that's a well-meaning thing, but I don't think sometimes the kids even appreciate having mom or dad following them around the whole time. It isolates them, it doubts them.
Yeah, okay, bad idea.
And I want to apologize too, because I do, what I react to in this situation is, we get a lot of feedback, and I listen to it, and apologize to you, because I thought I heard the word threatening. It's hard for me to hear in here, but I've heard that. I've heard people say you're threatening, you're doing that. The last thing I ever want to do is do that. I'm really hurting here with respect to what's happening here. I don't want to be in that situation. So apologies, but I thought that's what was being said, and that has been what some people have been saying, right? So, that these things are constructed to take a position or do something political. Really, I'm just looking at it like, I don't want it to be a disaster here, and I'm trying my best within the pandemic to do that. I think that having a trip in the future for the kids at the high school that missed out, that would be something wonderful. And we haven't gotten to the point of talking about that yet. I would like to. I know many people who would be willing, once this is all over, to do something like that and make that happen. And I apologize to the community. I do, because I don't like being in this position. And frankly, to be also kind of clear, the state of Connecticut put superintendents in this position. It said the superintendents will be making calls about this, that, and the other thing, and it had us do these things, right? It's not like I said, let me just take this and become the lightning rod of X, Y, or Z. This was something that the state of Connecticut did. So, to your point, Mr. Holt, with respect to policy, there is a balance that's established in the policy, and it's recommended by S&G. And that balance did get shifted toward the superintendents during the pandemic, because they wanted those decisions to be made because we are responsible to these other entities. For instance, I don't get to make a decision about when something comes down in the secure system from the HHD. I have to respond to that. It's not in my superintendent job duty. None of those things are in my superintendent job duty, but I've got to respond to that. And I couldn't necessarily consult all the elected officials on everything like that, because that's not how they set it up. They set it up so that I am a, a member of a certain bureaucratic, I guess, group or class, that they tell us what to do and we implement or we do it. So in normal times, policies are, running the way they are. But in these times, they have made that different, and they've made that different purposefully, so, hopefully when we get out of that period of time, that can shift. And we won't be, I won't be doing these things at this point. What I never would have imagined, again, I never would have imagined looking at, weekly testing data. And Ms. Griffin, I apologize if the response was strong there. This is the kind of thing that I worry about, is that exact scenario. Some kid that would normally just have experienced a little stomach upset, because frankly, that does happen whenever, you're on a trip sometime. It has to be looked at totally differently, and it's miserable. It's miserable for the staff who are calling, trying to figure out how to interpret this. It's miserable for what they feel like they have to do to that kid. People will get mad saying this was definitely the fish they just ate. They won't get to interpret it that way. The health district there and probably here would have to be consulted. It's a whole number of things, So it's these things that I'm saying, trying to avoid having those kinds of themes destroy it, or create more complexity, and finding an alternative like that at the high school is a great way to do that and to help.
I do not envy the decisions that you have to make on a daily basis. I know you've had a lot of decisions tonight, so I thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, and
all that you do.
I apologize, and I thank you for the grace of the board, because this has not been easy. I don't like being in a position like this. And I thank you for your, understanding and grace with that, and any of the parents too. Not the position that I really wanted to be.
I'm also.
Anybody else?
I just wanted to say one quick thing. So, and that is, Dr., I appreciate you're in a tough spot, but I do think that there is something to take away from this conversation, is that maybe we could have just waited to make the decision, because then we could have offered what is a bit of a softer landing, and that is, we're going to offer or follow up with an alternative trip as the pandemic goes away, and then maybe there could have been a little less of a rub, if you will. And I get it, you're in a tough spot. I do not envy you that at all, but I appreciate the fact that you're willing to talk about that for the prior class as well as maybe this class. And what are the other possibilities? I just think sometimes it's nice to talk about what the other possibilities are, and then, offer that in conjunction with, but you know what, bad news is this is what we have to do for this year. And I think that helps with everybody, with the board, with the parents, and no one's happy. I get that, but that's just sort of a little reflection of what has just happened here, is that, somebody might have a great idea of how could we make it a little bit more palatable, for lack of a better term, and that would be just my reflection on it.
Well, yeah, and the timeline is dictated by the tour company.
So
And
you
what's
had to
lost
do it
gained.
earlier
This is the
today or
time-
yesterday
This is the
versus
time they
tomorrow
need to
morning?
plan this out. The time they need, the deadline for them for the first commitment was October 1st. The time they need to plan it between now and execution in May is apparently these months. And then varying levels of dollars are lost. So I get it. And-
Okay, so anyway, all that said, thank you for considering and really embracing the idea of let's do something to the degree that we can to make it up, or a different possibility or something down the road. I think that's great, and I'm thrilled that we're able to kind of come up with that.
Thank you, Rini. Nobody else has anything to say. I'll try to keep it short. Of course, I have something to say. I can't not say anything. So first of all, I apologize for making the comment norovirus spreads after Griffin spoke, because if Ashley were chairing, she would have called me out of order because it was a comment. So I
She said food
apologize.
sickness too. Norovirus is good. Food sickness is
I had
good.
meetings canceled because of norovirus. Anyway, so this is all with respect, what I'm about to say. I too am disappointed that we're discriminating with vaccinated versus unvaccinated I realize the logistical nightmare that it is, even just looking on Washington DC's tourism website. The travel requirements are getting tested 1 to 3 days. So I thought Reni's idea of potentially shortening the trip to 3 days would, just give the kids a chance to just test once and still go. But I realize there's other things in there. I just fear that these actions, like, they don't show that we're ever going to exit the pandemic, really, because, we just keep waiting for things. Oh, we're waiting for the 5 to 12-year-olds. Oh, only 50% of them are vaccinated. Oh, we're waiting for the 12 to 18-year-olds. Only 50% of them are vaccinated. And I'm just throwing out numbers here, but we're never going to exit it. There's always going to be another variant, and we can't divide people into 2 classes of people. We have to find a way forward. Middletown, I know in terms of policy, their board does a consent agenda on field trips. They voted for a California trip and a Massachusetts trip yesterday, regardless of vaccination status. There was 2 other trips, but I didn't know where those were to. So if there's, and I guess this is our plea, because I thought we had put it on the agenda to kind of get feedback from the board to, before the decision was made. I guess this is my plea, to advocate if there's any changes that you could make to be more inclusive, I would love it. If not, the conversation continues. So that's all I have. Oh, Dana, I'm sorry, I didn't see you.
No, don't be sorry. I put it up, but you didn't get your turn. So it's fine. It's perfect. Thank you. Just something else that I had thought about, and again, I want to reiterate, this isn't fun for anybody involved, right? The students want to go. It's tough being in a situation where there's limitations or restrictions. But I understand that there's activities planned for kids that don't go in a typical year, correct? So like in a typical year, non-COVID, there are kids that don't go. But can we build upon that, given there might be a bigger group that can't attend? And maybe you create a multi-day like symposium or multi-day workshop opportunity, something that can be a little bit more mind-blowing or fun for these kids or these young adults, we should say, so that they don't feel left behind. And again, I know that the ultimate goal is to get these students and these young adults to DC, right? And in a situation where, I think our ultimate goal is to get them all there now, if we could, as long as, EHHD and CDC and all the other guidelines are there. Can we do something a little bit more grandiose, I guess, or mind-blowing for these students that don't necessarily get to have the opportunity to take this trip? Or maybe we're talking about civic, like we're really promoting civics and debate and all those kind of things in our high school years. Can we have our high school students maybe vote upon, different choices that they can do with this multi-day event and get them involved, get them excited about it, different mini DC, if you will, within Tolland. I don't know. I'm just trying to think outside the box so we can get creative for these young adults and these students that are, again, I think through this pandemic, we keep saying our kids are missing this, but I think it's also an opportunity for us to make it special in a different way, because we talked about this is once in a lifetime situation or once in a century pandemic, right? It's not fun. We're not loving living it, but there are some phenomenal things that have come out of this. So can we do something phenomenal for these students? Just a thought.
I have in the past, and I would personally put together a local trip for kids of things that we could do as a surrogate for those who were unable to attend because of the situation, with the pandemic. I would do that personally. I'm not sure how much they would love me running a trip when I'm sort of built as the one who robbed them of it. But I have done and would be willing to do that kind of thing, and have done it in the past. We've done the visits to the Benton Museum and to the Connecticut State Legislature and things like that. And I would be very happy to do that again and run it personally and have other people, work with me on it.
I think you're gonna have to go a little bit more wild than that, though.
Well, I know, we've had a couple
I'm
other
like,
things.
ooh.
Well,
I
yeah,
like behind the
we
wall.
try, but we would try to find surrogates, Homer Babbage is really interesting. There are many different dot center and things that could be very similar that we definitely, I would be happy to do that. Happy to personally, help get a high school trip alternative going. I want that for the children. I would want that. So yes, absolutely. If there's a feeling like that would be what people are interested in, I would definitely do it. And doing it, if there's 10 kids interested, so I'd have to take a kind of poll of who's interested. But absolutely, I don't want them to miss any experience. I want them to have it. I would personally become involved in making that happen for them. Either way, the local one or the one, at the high school in the future. And I would embrace that opportunity to do that.
So for the sake of time, do you guys mind if we move on since we're not voting on it?
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Dr. Willett. Flexibilities evaluation, H5.
Okay, so a lot of words here. I'll try to truncate it. The state of Connecticut put forward the flexibilities document, frankly, a flexibilities plan. The state of Connecticut does feel that in the future, they are going to be modifying and moving all of their plans towards holistic evaluation. Essentially, the State Department of Education convened the Educator Evaluation and Support Council, the PES, and it's known in the Connecticut General Statutes more as the Performance Evaluation Advisory Committee, or PEAC. It was tasked with reimagining the Connecticut evaluation system for the 21-22 year to take into account everything with respect to the pandemic. The reimagining here went through its various iterations and ended up, at this point, at the doorstep of boards of education. The local PDEC committees, or professional development evaluation committees, which are statutorily required committees of every district. In this district, I chair it. There are administrators, there are teachers. That group has to look at it first and then say, yes, this is what we want to go with. They've done that. And so from the state to the Connecticut Board, or State Board of Education, through the PEAC to the local communities, the flexibility document comes down to eventually the board level. So EES recommended the new flexibilities plan, the CSDE recommended the new flexibilities plan, the State Board of Education also went along with that. And the essential logic around it is that the COVID-19 pandemic continues to impact school districts, and that they wanted the evaluation process to have these foci, social and emotional learning and overall well-being of students, staff, and educators, equitable and culturally responsive learning opportunities and teaching practices. And frankly, these were all sort of independent bullets. I kind of truncated them into 4, but this summarizes it. Academic achievement and engagement with families. So it wants the evaluation plan to focus on those things. And so the evaluation plan for the district pivoted to do that. That flexibilities document that you see, it's a,
Where do we see it?
I'm in the wrong item.
It
I'm
was
sorry.
sent out.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
And that wasn't the
And it's
one
for
I-
the board, and I can
Oh, there.
post it.
Oh, okay.
This is what's linked. This describes basically and adheres to the state of Connecticut's flexibilities. And so, it isn't that different from the plans in that, it still has a composition of, there's a goal component where teachers set goals on specific targets for learning growth of the children. A little bit different than the past is that those goals' success can be based on a numeric achievement of a particular goal. For instance, of these 24 children who are struggling with a certain level on the performance and the DIBELS, I'm going to get them to this other level on the DIBELS by the end of the year, or on a frequency of 5 out of 7 assessments between now and then. That's your traditional The state of Connecticut flexibility is now added what is more qualitative as a sort of artifact based, so you can hand over various artifacts, because sometimes children will make progress. They may not hit the exact numeric targets, so the progress they're made is also evaluated through the various artifacts that demonstrate the kid's progress in a variety of things, maybe not just one assessment, but maybe a series of both qualitative and quantitative. So the teacher has the option of also providing that evidence and being evaluated on that evidence as well. And so that is considered more generally holistic. And so the terminology of holistic makes its way into that. And so ultimately, the goals are set on a choice of either a data strict hard number goal or a qualitative goal that has a holistic choice involved and holistic information, artifact information provided. The big difference between the flexibilities of last year with the executive order and this year is when the executive order ended, summatives were once again allowed. And so this flexibility has a summative, because last year teachers did not receive summative evaluation. This year they do. And so this flexibility incorporates the summative evaluation as well. And so the other, as you scroll down through, it's just basically an iteration of it, gives you an example of how, what a goal would look like. The indicators of success, is the student learning outcomes, things like that. There's examples of that in here. This is essentially the paperwork that they ultimately fill out as an example of the students' names and their performance levels go in there. They set a target based on those performance levels. There's a color coding, and you can see the or here. They can choose the strict mathematical targets. They can also choose the qualitative targets, in which case they have to provide evidence of every artifact and how that benefited the student learning. Then they get evaluated on a 1 to 4 cycle, with 4 being exemplary, 3 being effective, 2 being developing, 1 is unacceptable. And so these mirror essentially the plan that has been in place for some time, but the state of Connecticut, through all those means described in the opening document, from CSD to the EEC to the PEAC to the Connecticut General Statutes, wanted these shifted in the direction of the focus on the social learning, the families and all that. So these goals also, the difference is that it used to be really just a goal based on specific, sometimes academic success. Now it's also based on, as part of the goal process, social emotional, family outcomes, things like that. It's expanded the kinds of things that can be assessed through the goal and data process. This also, to do a full presentation on the entire state of Connecticut's teacher evaluation document would mean a review of the CCT from 2017, the evaluation called SEED plan from the state. And then we would go through all the domains. There's 4 different domains. There's subcategories of all those domains. There's sub sheets that are used to rate where a teacher is ranked on those domains. So none of that goes away. That's still used as a tool. That would be a 2-hour to 3-hour presentation. And I can do that as, sort of breakout. We can do that in a curriculum committee if you want to go over the deep dive. But basically for tonight, the state of Connecticut would like people to do flexibilities. And the last step in the train is, after you get your PDEC to do it, is bringing it to you and saying, okay, everybody's, all these entities, all these have been checked. Now we're at the board level. So talking to the state today and asking them exactly what that would look like, that's where you see that motion. That motion here is the exact motion they would like to see.
When do you need this by?
Now,
So this is first read and you want it.
well, there are some things that the state of Connecticut, the way that this comes down. This is one of those things that probably, would be good to roll with rather than try to do a second read on. If you want to put it as second read, the district is going to be moving forward probably with that. Otherwise, we're going to hold up everything. And the state of Connecticut, is recommending it. The State Board of Ed is recommending it, the EEC is recommending it, the EAC is recommending it, the PDEC committee locally did it. Unfortunately, it's just, you know, timeline wise, when I did reach out to certain people about this, a response that I was given was that this was flexibilities wasn't a thing at all. And then, you know, then it was a thing. So, you know, essentially, we needed to move forward with our evaluation process. And, you know, if we do a second read in the next meeting, you can. But certainly, it's not just coming from us to you as a change. This is the state of Connecticut's flexibility. You know, that's the reason why I'm saying you might not want to do a second read on this. It'll just hold up the whole thing.
Jacob,
Thank you. So I actually would be interested at some point in curriculum, doing a more in-depth look at this, because I'm looking at this and I don't feel that I personally, and I think many board members would agree, have a perfect picture about how this all plays up into the various components that help our teachers and help our students. I did have a couple of questions about this. Number one, hypothetically, if the board even wanted to or was unhappy with this, then do we really even have much of a choice as far as modifying it goes?
Well, so the circumstances around this
Yeah.
are that if we don't do it, we default to the 2019, you know, plan, which is what was previously approved by all entities, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't include a social emotional element in the way that this does, nor does it include the family, you know, foci that this does, or the holistic, eval stuff. So, you know, the thing that will happen is we'll drop back to the 2019 plan, which was the one in force for the time. But last year, that the board put it aside for the flexibilities document, so the PDEC, and similarly this year, the state is asking us to do this. You know, this kind of thing would be a very, very good thing to do in curriculum. It would be like a good 2 hours to really go through all of it, and I would love to do that. It's just, this is not about the 100-page overall thing. It's really about this year for 21-22 and what the state, the PIAC, the EEC, and all these entities are asking us to do. So we did jump through the hoops and do all of this at your level. And your question was, you know, if we do a second read, if you are not opposed to the basic concept that this is espousing, then, you know, going with it might help us move, you know, along in the process. If you do a second read, then we are moving along in this process. And as of the next board meeting, if you, for some reason, decided against it, we would have to retool everything and drop back to 2019. So I understand if you wanted to, but I think it would, given that it's not being suggested by us, that it's come about by a number of different, you know, entities, it's worth maybe letting it roll for 21.
One last question / concern about this is that, you know, I don't disagree that things, you know, such as social and emotional learning and staying in contact with families is certainly an important part of a teacher's job, and it's an important element that they should be spending time on. But how is that weighted against academic, you know, performance in the classroom and that nature?
So super great for a couple of hours, but in general terms, the pendulum about 10 years ago was heavily weighted on strict academic numericals, right? And they were finding that, you know, that the variance there in the scores, like somebody who missed something by a point and be entirely in a different classification versus this other classification. They were and used to say, you know, let's apply those against, principals or administrators or superintendents, all of that. In particular, superintendents have always sort of owned this along the way, but boards can do what they want with superintendents, but they were dictating more or less how they applied it to people like principals, you know, that kind of thing. They moved away from that because of the complexities of the evaluation process and how it was looked at as not fair and not representative of people's efforts, et cetera, et cetera. And they moved in the direction of this holistic concept. Now, just as an aside, the state of Connecticut does dictate a very large amount of this. So for instance, their statement that they're moving holistically, it makes sense for us to start working in that realm because it seems like they're moving to, and they use this term holistic, evaluation as a state. And when they do hand down the CCT for 2022 or whatever it's going to be, because the one that came down for 2017, it's prescriptive, seed and how these domains fall and all of that. There's only so much we get to play with within our plan. We can't deviate completely from what the state's prescribed. This holistic move is where the state appears to be going. So being in alignment in some way in the flexibilities document is one of their ways of, I think, gently edging districts along to start thinking and modifying some of the process towards this. I know a lot of teachers prefer the hard number, and then a lot of other ones didn't. So it's not about teachers trying to find a way to do something differently. This is really being driven from the state. So, there's a movement away from sort of punitive numericals and trying to be more comprehensive in how they view what students' progress is and how it's evaluated. Because some teachers were assigned, say, a classroom that had learners in it that were struggling a little bit more, maybe the level they were assigned or something. And when those teachers didn't make a certain level of progress mathematically within a year, whereas this other teacher was teaching an AP class full of honors kids, in a certain circumstance, they were looked at as that's not fair. And so they were looking for other ways to determine whether a teacher is being successful with that population, not excluding scores, because they do still have, as you can see, indicators of success, student learning outcomes, specific targets. They're just including now artifact qualitative stuff with it so that a teacher who may have a population of students who, again, with Sternberg and Gardner, 11 different intelligences, there's many ways people can show their stuff, but a lot of times academically, they may not score awesome on a test. They may make X amount of growth, that they're compared against somebody who doesn't have the same circumstance, and that, they were looking for ways that teacher could also demonstrate how they had provided success for those kids. Either way, they still have to make growth, but it's another way of demonstrating how they're doing that. And so the holistic evaluation is what they're heading towards. Whether we like it or not, the place to make that impact, if one doesn't like it, would be at the EES, PEAC, or that level. That's where that conversation is happening right now. And what they're doing here, in my opinion, is they're getting districts ready for this holistic element. And they're essentially saying, work in this holistic element because this is going to be part of it. And so that's what this is for 21-22. It's working that in.
Oh, I saw Tony's hand, Rainy's hand. Did I miss anybody? Did you have your hand?
I did, but I'm good.
Okay, so I'll go with Tony.
Okay, and I appreciate it, Dr. Willett. Now, over the fairly recent history, we've had a number of times where, we've had something brought to the board, a document that absolutely had to be approved immediately, regardless of how much time we've had to absorb it or bad things happen. I also recognize that a lot of this, was put together with a whole lot of conversation with very, experts in the field and then pushed down to us. But this approval of this and really getting our teeth into this is what we have to do. I mean, when it's in 90-10, it's in the role of the board, looking at this evaluation and not just rubber stamping. So I think we've got to take the time, maybe having some special meetings, bringing the curriculum, asking the questions, really understanding before we vote on it, to be doing our due diligence. Now, if this has to be done quickly, then we have to turn around and do it quickly. But we can't just approve it, and we can't just move on.
You certainly can. If you'd like to have a couple of special sessions, you can. I mean, whatever you want to do. It's just, it's the way the state of Connecticut would like us to go. There are some things that I think make total sense to do, multiple kinds of rezone, that type of thing. Somebody just asked me, I don't know which one of you did, whether I think in this situation that would be the best use of your time in the timeline, I would suggest that because of where this is coming from, it may not be the best use of the board's time because of where this is coming from.
Well, but
Having said that,
90-10 and then the state, you know, the associated state statute that feeds into 90-10 don't give, you know, it sets these type of evaluations as one of the core responsibilities of the board.
so 90-10 talks about, well, first of all, this is not your typical evaluation process cycle. And in general terms, like the 2019 August one that was brought to the board for approval, it's 100 pages. This is a flexibilities adjustment for the pandemic done by the state of Connecticut. It is not that. It is a flexibilities 1 year thing
Right.
that is, you know, that is given to districts, you know, through that process that waters down SDSD, DES, and all the other acronyms there are all going through the thing. So this basically is only pandemic related. It's related only to this point in time for this year. And the executive order that was, you know, not allowing the summatives is gone, so summatives are in it. So this is really something that the state of Connecticut just wants the districts to kind of roll with respect to their teachers during this time and the kids and everybody else. And those are the four, I truncated them to four kind of foci.
But merely
So
by
it's
the
not,
fact that-
90-10 is really more talking about your traditional process, not your pandemic exceptions.
When I think the, you know, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, the fact that we're in the pandemic does not eliminate or even lessen our responsibilities. If anything, it increases them. And I think the fact that we're asked to vote and approve this says that we still have a responsibility for it, even though the state approved it and pushed it down. It's still upon us to put our name on it.
Yeah, and I'm happy if you want to have special sessions to do that. It's okay. Obviously.
I'm
It's
gonna go-
just,
Oh, sorry.
no, it's just like, you know, it's one of those pandemic things that the state is putting forward. So I'm happy to do extra sessions.
I'm gonna go over to Rainey and then, I don't know if I'm allowed to do this, I might enter and then
Oh,
do.
yeah, I'll do it,
Okay, so Rainey, then do.
All right, so I just have a couple questions. So you're saying this is for the pandemic time. So after the pandemic is over, it reverts to what it was before?
One of two things happens. It drops back to either the 2019 document that we have, or, and this is what I think is coming, the state of Connecticut will provide entirely new standards through which we must follow, which will then result in,
But is that a new vote when that happens?
well,
My question, or we
theoretically,
accept
and
this and then they say, oh, well, by the way, we're gonna not have it just for the pandemic. We're
They're
gonna
not-
make it
this-
forever.
this is only for the pandemic. And so what traditionally happens is the state of Connecticut lays down its requirements for teacher evaluation, and the districts then write their plans around it. And at the end of that process, with the statutory committee, in this case, it's PDEC, admin and teachers that work together collaboratively, have to vote on the document, and that's all done and the dust settles. It's given to the board to vote on in the traditional broad 100-page, like the plan that is the actual big plan is 100 or more pages of 10
I'm
font.
just, when
So-
we're talking about this, like if we say yes, it lasts for only 1 year.
This lasts
and then we
for
go
1
back to
year.
2019 until something else
Right,
happens.
and my guess is what would happen is at the end of this year, we drop back to the 2019 August plan that was approved by the board. This is an exception for this year.
Okay, because I didn't get that the first go around. Second thing I wanted to say was, I do not necessarily see this as specifically for the curriculum committee. I mean, curriculum is the curriculum for the students. I mean, this is teacher evaluation. So when you're saying you would go through it just with the curriculum committee, I'm not sure that I would necessarily agree with that as a plan. If the whole board has to approve it, I feel like we should all kind of understand what it is that the teachers are being evaluated on. That's just my own opinion. And then I have a question that I'm not sure I want to answer, but so when you're submitting holistic, when the teachers are submitting holistic, you know, things like instead of test scores, well, who evaluates that? Is it just their immediate supervisor? Is it the superintendent? You know what I mean? That
Yeah,
seems
yeah,
like it
the-
could be a very slippery slope depending on who is looking at it, right? I might think, hey, that looks great, and somebody else might, oh, that's terrible, but
Well,
and we don't have to get into that, maybe that's more
Well, no, good
when you
question.
go
And
into
then
it
that's
deeper,
why
but
So in my mind, I thought of the committees, the one that fell where this might be most applicable would be curriculum, only because you're really talking, the 4 domains are talking specifically about proficiencies with respect to education and teachers and admin that are then used to enhance curriculum, enhance the experience of the kids. Administrators evaluate, every teacher is assigned an administrator. In fact, every staff member is assigned an administrator, but teacher evaluation plan is specific in the teacher's requirements to the state. The evaluation plan is specific to teachers. So paras have a different thing, custodians have a different thing, secretaries have a different thing. So the admin are trained though too. They're trained in their 092 programs. Then they have to go through state of Connecticut training as an evaluator as well before they can then go in and start doing that. So they are trained in how to implement this plan and all of its facets. Then we also do calibrations. So we'll take a document or an observation or something, and admin will calibrate by looking at the same thing and then using the rating tools and rubrics, see where everybody fell on that, so that we as a group also try to evaluate the same way. So and admin are also evaluated through a very similar process that is very largely dictated by the state of Connecticut, and it ends up watering down into a plan that the district needs. So this will revert back at the end of this year to the 2019 August plan that was approved by the board. This flexibility is an exception for 1 year. However, I
I get
think
it.
the
You're
state,
thinking it's gonna go.
I think
I
they're
got
going
that, but I
to,
just wanted,
yeah.
if I'm signing my name, I'm only signing until this period of
just 1
time
year.
as an exception. It's not, I mean,
Just like
I'll be
last
honest
year.
with you, I had no time to even look at that thing, because it didn't come out till kind of late. So I'm feeling a little out of the loop of it on what it even really says and what we would be agreeing to. So anyway, but I appreciate your, feedback on it.
Yeah, and so this year, I've focused the attention where I can, and so things that come out on Friday are what I can get out on a Friday. You know
I'm
what I
not
mean?
complaining, I'm just saying
So-
from where I'm sitting.
Yeah.
It's
No, I get
a
it, get it
little, I'm a
completely.
little
Yeah,
like
that's-
feeling, oh dear.
That's why anything I can, try to help with, I will. And to answer it again, it's this year, only 1 year. Just like last year, we did a flexibilities and it was only for 1 year. This is the same thing, it's for 1 year. So
So yeah, I mean, I hate voting on stuff where I don't have time to read it, so I would really appreciate that. I hate doing it to you, but if I'm gonna vote on something, I want to make sure I understand.
I don't mind. I'm thinking about your time and where this is coming from. I don't mind however many sessions you want to have about it. It's just of the things you look at. Some of them are coming vicariously from staff and from people. This is coming from the state of Connecticut, so it's just,
Griffin. Thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of in agreement. I feel like I don't really know enough about it. Like, I'm just looking at this, like overall well-being of students, like we need to quantify that. I feel like a little bit more, like what exactly is considered the overall well-being, and even academic achievement and engagement with families, like what exactly would be, how are we measuring that? I guess
So-
would be my thing, like, does every family gonna have a conference with the teachers? Is that, kind of what we're
well,
going
that can be
towards,
part of the
or-
holistic part of it. Most of the time, you'll have a student learning outcome and you have an indicator of success. So an indicator of student learning outcome might be to improve the math scores of my students. I'm being very general. And then an indicator of success might be that, that of this population of students in my, algebra 2 or 1A section, who are struggling on the scholastic math assessment with these various things, there are 67 students of that kind. And on the next 5 out of 7 assessments in this area, they will improve to, Y performance level, or they might set a target at the end that they'll improve to Y performance level. There's a traditional numeric goal, and so there's some examples of these numerics, in this document that the board can look through. Having said that, the pivot that the state is making is to say, you can have the data-driven goal, which many teachers are comfortable with, but you also can choose this artifact-based submission of other pieces of evidence, writing samples and other things that show your proficiency in helping guide the kids to a better performance level. And that's what the state is pivoting to, is also allowing that kind of qualitative holistic view versus the kind of numeric thing that I just gave you as an example. They also have, you know, the observation domain, which usually is about a weight of 40%, you know, going in and looking what the teacher is doing, artifact, like the lesson plan and observing the teacher. And there's a whole process for that. And then there's the ratings that they give, that they would tag the teacher with. You know, what this is meant to do for flexibilities is how would you rate that? SEL, you know, normally SEL might be a hard thing to do with a hard quantitative data piece because it's social and emotional. So, and the holistic side of things, it might be, it could be a rating on how kids, I'm just being very general, how happy kids are, you know, like in your class, or you know, their satisfaction with the class going up or down based on what you're doing. And you can give some small survey and you measure that and you set targets, et cetera. That's a numeric way of doing it. But another way of doing it would be setting, and this is what holistic, you know, is kind of doing in the state, some kind of family outreach goal that in this month, you're going to reach out to X number of families and, you know, and something like that. That's more qualitative and more criteria, you know, based in terms of I did or I didn't do this. That's one of the things allowed in there is they want to encourage the outreach to families. So you might set a target of how many families you're going to reach, and you're going to do this many 30-minute meetings with these families. That now, aside from strict math score or strict take them from this to this on a performance level on assessment, adds a layer of, I would like to do, you know, I'm just going to throw a number, 50 30-minute parent meetings, you know, between now and this other time. And that's an objective that's not a hard quantitative data objective, but is looked at as one that enhances the community, teacher, family, partnership relationship. And it has to be mutually agreed upon with the administrator. So a teacher can't, and a teacher would never do this, but a teacher can't say, I'm going to do 3. Because the administrator would go, you know, 3, you know, you have 2 parent-teacher conferences, and those are 2 of them already. So, you know, we need to choose something more, you know, more realistic for that. And so a teacher generally would not select a goal that's easy to get to, but that gives them the ability as a family, it opens that domain for them to be rated on with a, you know, with a holistic goal, which is the
No,
domain.
that's fine. I don't want you don't have to keep going as far as that. I'm just saying, I would think another meeting would be
Well, and this is what
advantageous
that
to
meeting
kind
will
of,
be about.
yes,
Would be
to
about
understand,
exactly what I'm.
like the word holistic is so big.
Am I gathering consensus on
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
No one wants to move it to action?
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess the only question I had on that, and we can save it for the next meeting, but I'll just give you a heads up. My question is, how do the teachers feel about it? Like, what are the pros and cons to them?
The PDEC approved.
Okay.
And that's the statutory committee set up by the CGF, Connecticut General Statutes, for the purpose of doing things like this. And
No, but our teachers.
that is our teachers.
Okay.
Our PDEC is our
Oh, okay.
teachers. It is a required committee for districts to have. It has teachers and admin on it for the purpose of making these decisions.
Okay.
So,
Tony, one last thing, and that's it.
No, I just-
but I think we
just looking
can't
for a
wait
path
to do
forward here,
special
so-
sessions.
So, and I think we're on the same page, Jeff. Well, I just want to make sure before we leave this, the plan then is to table this for now pending the scheduling of a special session as soon as we can.
Do you want one?
One.
Yeah.
Second read.
So the special session will probably be a couple of hours, depending on how deep of a dive you want.
We might not need like a
Yeah.
serious deep dive, but more than this.
Yeah,
You
and
know?
more time then.
Yeah,
just more time to
Well,
read it.
yeah, of course. So I really am just asking out of, do you want 2? Do you want to, this doodle poll? I'm gonna send out a little doodle poll again and try to get the best time. So I can choose the 2 top rated times
Like
as.
6 to 7 on a Monday.
Yeah, 6 to 7 on Monday.
It's a very
Just
small.
throwing it
doodle
out there.
poll.
Definitely do that if you want.
That's fine.
Do you want me to do it in a doodle poll though, or are we kind of all looking at?
Yeah, that's
a
fine.
good way of
And it
doing
doesn't have to be.
Sure.
Well,
All right.
3 hours.
No.
Thank you.
Okay,
All
well,
right, shoot for 1, and then we'll go over a
I'll
little
shoot
bit.
shoot for 1 hour, one session.
One
Is that what we're
session,
looking
1
for?
hour. Tough.
Got it.
All right, guys, can we move on
Yeah,
to
yeah,
committees
yeah,
and
yeah.
liaison reports? All right, curriculum, did you guys meet?
We are meeting on the 28th,
28th, okay, how about policy? We met, well, 30-10.
but that was a moment.
Okay. Communications met, we had a brief conversation, there was a lot of PTO members on there. So we got, oh, you weren't there. It was just Sophia and I, just got a little history with the PTOs and what they're allowed to do and what we're allowed to do, and just on how we can improve communications with them. So it was a good meeting. Talked a little bit about social media, but social media is too hard to control, so. We're just trying to figure out how to bring people back to the core, which is the boardroom and Dr. Willett's page. So that was it for communications. FFC meeting next week. Am I missing anyone?
I'll just give a quick update with mental health. That we did go over a list of preliminary suggestions, which we're going to kind of fine tune and evaluate in more detail. But a lot of them do have to do with schools and kids. So some of that may eventually find its way back to the boardroom eventually, but just giving everyone a heads up with that.
Oh, good. Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah.
All right, so we can move on. I didn't know I was chair.
Christina and Stina, just
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Birch Grove, obviously we're coming out of the grand opening. Like Tepto did a phenomenal job. We're still working on getting the swing set in there and finalizing some last minute change orders and last minute things. And our next meeting is next Tuesday.
Thank you, Dana. All right. Board action, which I don't think, policy 3010 is a first read. So why don't we just have a discussion if anyone has any questions? Guys,
It's quick.
I've got a clarifying question. It's a clarifying question.
I'm just
Should we
kidding.
just go the extension past 10 o'clock now?
No,
we can do it.
But do it, go.
All right. All right, so on page 2, it calls for a periodical review of negative line items. Can we define periodically a little bit more? And is that any time it would go negative or?
Well, the way I look at that, traditionally, what that aligns with is that in their FFC meetings, the FFC kind of reviews it and says, why is that negative? And that would constitute a periodic. I would think that subcommittee meetings and or board meetings would then fulfill that purpose of periodic. And I think its intent is really just to say, we should be asking about these and just, and so as a matter of the policy, you're codifying that as just, hey, whenever that's out there, make sure there's some process and that somebody's asking.
Okay.
So I see that as what you're regularly
Just to
doing.
add in, because what we were trying to do there, Madhu, is make sure, to the point that somebody made, the FFC committee now may have different priorities than the next FFC committee. So we wanted to put that in there where that would get looked at, but not drive them into where they had to look at everyone every meeting. They could really kind of focus it on whatever that focus want to be. Okay.
And that was just gonna be my add on that was, because there's always a chance we won't meet, so we
Right.
didn't want to say monthly, we
Right.
didn't, so that's kind of why we left it like that. And then I just have one quick thing.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I was just kidding.
We forgot June under the period covered. I think we need to add June as far as the year end, so basically what we just did tonight.
Yeah.
I think we need to have that in there, and my suggestion would be for the submitted date, we either use September or October.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. 100%. Yeah.
So I don't know, we're a
We'll
little late this year, I think, because of the pandemic. Should we go back to September?
I would say September is typically the time.
Yeah.
I don't know what how it'll be affecting us next year, but I would say typically it would be September. Somewhere around September 8th, and the first meeting in September, maybe the second, but if we say September, I think you're safe.
Yeah, okay. So that would be my only add, having to notice that we missed what we talked about before.
Everybody good with that?
Jacob?
Oh, Jacob.
Yeah, all right. I hope to keep this brief. It doesn't open a can of worms. But I know there was a lot of discussion about this regarding transfers and, the virtues of that and the different arguments for and against. I just wanted to ask Christine, because I know you attended this in the policy meetings, if you felt like this was a decent place to land with regards to that. Do you feel like we have a good handle up on that, or?
I do, and we had talked about this a fair amount, and that's what we added the line item overages, because we felt like we were looking at that, but not necessarily saying we need to transfer from one line item to another. So we felt that that was even more transparent to keep the negative balances. And then have the discussion and explanation and go forward with it from there. So we left that 30,000 coded, right? Was that, Tony, was kind of like state, like a state or an old shipment in Goodwin kind of that we kind of left that in. But we added that one line item to kind of talk about how we're doing things now and how we're being transparent and how we're, Dr. Willett is coming back to us with the explanations for why. So I was comfortable with it.
Okay, good to know. I was just curious about that.
Yeah, that way we're also not, slowing down this, the staff and just every time you would transfer,
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, I agree. And we thought, I'm sorry, ready?
No, I was gonna say, no, I agree with Christine. I think this is fair and I think it's transparent.
And the intent there, Jacob, the 30,000 number there was really a protection, if you're not doing what we're doing, if you're going with the transfer thing, then that creates that bubble that protects you. By putting that line in that we were just talking about, we felt that offered that same protection with the negative balances. So whichever way is the better way of going, protections are there. You could go either direction and still be valid from a policy perspective.
Okay, no, I think that's a smart idea.
Anybody else? So that will go on board action next meeting, and we're on to public participation. If anyone from the public would like to speak, you have 2 minutes. Please raise your hand, and comments must be limited to items on the agenda.
I have to, give me one moment just to share this, sorry, stop sharing. Share you want me to share the timer, I think, right?
Sure.
So, sorry, yeah, it's a little slow.
Although I don't see any hands.
Well,
So.
if you go right into it. then I don't
Going
know.
once,
Sorry.
going twice. Okay, if there's no public participation,
But good job.
obviously there's a lot of discussion around what's in the future, new business. None. So, sorry. Motion adjourned. Can I get a second? It's all second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.